Are we ready? Okay. Seeing a presence of a quorum, I'm calling to order this meeting of the Amherst School Committee on Tuesday, March 8th at 6:31 p.m. And we'll begin with roll call attendance. Make sure that we can all hear each other. And I'll just go in order on my screen. Irv,
Present.
Jennifer,
present.
Peter,
present.
Ben,
present.
and Allison present. Normally we'd be looking at minutes tonight, but we do not have the minutes ready, so we will look at those at our next meeting. So we will move into public comment. The public comment document is attached to the agenda, but we're going to do things, going to try to do things a little differently tonight. We're going to start with live comments for any attendees that are in the Google Meet tonight, and invite you folks to speak. Then we'll proceed to the voice recordings, and then we'll go to the email. And then I'll come back to a last call for any live comments during the meeting. And just as a reminder, per our policy, speakers may speak only once during a public comment, up to a maximum of 3 minutes. All attendees are invited to speak during the meeting. And if you have also submitted written or voice recordings, we'll skip over those during this meeting. But all written comments are included in the published packet so long as they were received by 3 p.m. today. Also, it's very complicated tonight. We have a budget hearing later on in our agenda this evening. And so at that point, we'll again open the floor for attendees to offer comments specific to the budget proposal for FY23 during that hearing. Even if you've already spoken during public comment, you're welcome to speak during the public hearing about the budget. So with that, I'm going to open the floor. Please use the raise hand button to request the floor, and I'll call on speakers in the order that the hands are raised. Lots of attendees and no interested speakers, it looks like. Maria.
Thank you. Maria Kopicki, South Amherst resident. Because the elementary school building project space summary continues to exceed benchmarking, both in the district's prior feasibility work and in comparable MSBA projects, there have been multiple pleas to decrease the square footage of the proposed building project. A thorough analysis of the number and sizes of spaces would have included, for example, an analysis of how many adults and how many students would occupy the various rooms in the building and for what duration of time, actively seeking out what rooms could serve as multifunction spaces, what office spaces could be smaller, can all the spaces proposed be properly staffed and supervised in addition to providing in-classroom instruction? Is there an operational budget that shows whether the town can afford the staffing levels required, particularly when town finances have indicated the need to limit and reduce operating budgets in order to expand the capital budget? And finally, the term operational efficiency has been used, but not explained. If this is referring to reductions in staff, which positions will be reduced? The need for flexibility is cited in defense of a larger building, yet the other elementary school building in town hardly gets a mention. Crocker Farm is going to take on more students in a space that has already been described as a tight fit and a challenge by school administration. The 375 elementary students and staff will continue to compete with the preschool for resources. The building and site have many of the same infrastructural needs as its counterparts at Fort River and Wildwood: poor heating and cooling, poor ventilation, leaking roof, inadequate thermal envelope, substandard security, and inadequate accessibility. Elementary students and staff at Crocker Farm will be expected to function in 163 square feet per student, while students at the consolidated school would have far more, 184 square feet per student. A feasibility study of Crocker Farm completed 2 years ago identified about $9 million in repairs and improvements that are needed now. It also demonstrated that this school could be expanded to accommodate up to 500 students for around $20 million. If school leadership truly values equity, it will commit to timely improvements for Crocker Farm and make modest reductions in the proposed consolidated building. Crocker Farm School, where 40% of the elementary population will be educated, is the place to look for flexibility in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Angelica. I believe you're still muted. Are you able to unmute yourself?
She is unmuted. It's just the sound's not coming through. So I just wanted to note that it's not that she's muted as per Google Meet. Hi, Angelica. I don't want to speak in the third person.
Just want to say, Angelica, you could go to your URL bar, and there might be an icon up there that looks like a camera or a microphone to make sure your computer knows what microphone to pull in from, or something like that. Or in settings, maybe.
Could be the other option is to call in, from a telephone to the number that's listed. And I think I heard Ms. McDonald say that she's going to come back for one more round of this after the.
Yeah, I was going to say we can, if there's other folks that would like to speak, if not, we can move into the audio recordings. And I know that I believe that Angelica also has a voice recording. So I'm happy to play that in place of your live comments. Oh, we have another live comment. So Kate.
Hi, I'm one of the 3 special education teachers supporting some of the district's most complex special education learners at Wildwood. I'm one of the ILC teachers. And I've written a couple of public comments in the meetings leading up to this, speaking about the roles my students play in the character and culture of Wildwood, as well as the specifics why my students need spaces carved out for them. But I wanted to also talk specifically to the spaces we're currently using as referenced against the proposed spaces. So my current room at Wildwood is 1,000 square feet with 2 bathrooms and a sensory space not included in that square footage. As I understand the plan, which I could be wrong, things change. There's a reduction to 800 square feet per ILC classroom. And in the middle of this year, when there are 10 students accessing services and their education in my classroom, it was a really tight fit. There are multiple instances in which the mobility and movements and needs of my students could have been unsafe if not carefully and precisely managed. One of my most medically fragile students needed a second space outside of my classroom in order to receive their therapies and portions of their program day due to space limitations. I think it's probable and possible, based on what I'm hearing, that these enrollment numbers could come again in all 3 classrooms, and losing 200 square feet from what we're already using is concerning. Losing more than that could make delivering services to these incredible students unsafe, and at worst, and at best, it would impact program quality. I also want to speak to the importance of the space for therapies and service providers. Under the current space restrictions of COVID, the OT and PT space is now a 3rd ILC classroom. This means that all OT and PT spaces, services occur within students' instructional spaces, and that our OT and PT have to migrate between the environments, and set up and breakdown from sessions happens during session, losing valuable session time. So I just kind of wanted to speak to some of the logistics outside of the larger issue things I've spoken to in my public comment. And thanks. I hate talking in front of people. Thanks for your time, y'all.
Thank you. And we'll try again. Angelica.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yay! Oh my gosh. Oh, the wonderful world. My apologies. It's my new Mac laptop. You'd think it's new, and it's just having all sorts of compatibility problems. So I'll try to keep it short. Hi, everybody. My name's Angelica Maria Bernal, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at UMass Amherst. I'm also a parent of 2 elementary school children. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for your service on such an important project for our community. I'm speaking today because I wanted to express how deeply concerned I remain by potential reductions in the size for the new elementary school building project. The pushback expressed on the total square footage for the proposed building continues to time and again target the special needs education programs. This is incredibly disheartening to my family. The new elementary school building is an opportunity for us to build towards a better future for our children, all of our children. It's an opportunity to build for them a building that better reflects education needs for the 21st century while also addressing our commitments to our planet. An important part of all of this, which we must keep in mind, is equity and inclusion. Our special education programs have been lumbering in subpar facilities that reflect architectures of the 1970s, ones which are less inclusive. We are building for the 21st century and for the next 50 years. Enough space will finally allow us to do that. It will allow us to finally have the space that my son Bodhi, who has Down syndrome, needs to strengthen his muscles to their fullest potential. Physical therapy equipment is big and takes up a lot of space. Spaces are currently tight. You can barely fit a swing in there. Our special needs kids don't need less. They need more space. I understand the push for reductions comes as a factor of the proposed costs for this project, which are sizable. I'm also on the school committee, on the elementary building committee, so I know that. But as a political scientist, I can appreciate that the increased costs are directly the result of drastic geopolitical and health changes that over the past few years have had a significant amount of economic repercussions, including most directly in construction costs. Any amount of reductions will not change this or go back to the cost of the original failed elementary school project or even come close to it. Reductions will simply amount to a race to the bottom run on the backs of our special needs programs and populations which I may add are not decreasing but growing. I want our community instead to race to the top. Our community has been working very hard to build strong social justice foundations for our schools. Doing so means for the 21st century, closing the inequality gaps in our educational structures and taking care of our most vulnerable populations. This is the Amherst I believe in. It's the Amherst that I believe our elected officials would want to uphold and that my fellow citizens will want to invest in for our collective future. I take pride in being in a community with some of the best schools in our state and making the investments we can in the present. Investments that are long overdue can be an incredible opportunity to not only strengthen our already outstanding schools, but to make them the standard bearers of excellence for all of Massachusetts. Thank you again, once again for all your service.
Thank you. Other comments? If there are no other hands raised right now, I'll move on to the audio recordings, the voice recordings. And as mentioned at the beginning, I noticed that some people have joined us since my rambling on at the beginning of this, but I will play the audio recordings, then go to the email comments that we've received that are not duplicates of the audio, and then open the floor again as a last call for live comments. So with that, I'm going to begin playing the audio.
My name is Catherine Oppie, and I'm an Amherst resident and a former Amherst School Committee member. I wanted to start my public comment by thanking the school committee, the administration, and teachers who've developed an educational plan with the goal of meeting the needs of all children so they can reach their fullest potential. This plan reflects years of hard work by our educators. The Amherst School District has long strived for equity and excellence for our students. However, for the past many years, educators have carried out this remarkable work in school buildings that are among the worst in the state. Our children, teachers, and staff deserve better. After turning down tens of millions of dollars from the state for a previous project, we once again have a chance to provide our school community with a building that will fully support the hard work they do every day. The MSBA requires that the building project be sized and designed to support the plan you are voting on tonight. This means that the building's design and square footage is necessary to implement the educational plan that we are currently employing in the school and will employ in the new building. We have a great plan but we are currently exercising it under great physical constraints. I also know that you've all done your due diligence. You have asked questions, spoken with the community, heard public comments and presentations from project experts. I greatly appreciate the depth of knowledge that you have all worked to achieve to take this important vote. I support this educational plan, and I support the school committee taking this next step toward a school building that meets the needs of our kids now and into the future. Thank you.
My name is Bennett Heathcliff. I live in Amherst. I have 2 kids in the public school system. The other day I read a public comment from a retiree activist who organized against the previous school building project, claiming that the new school must be net zero. 2 years ago, I would have totally agreed. But I'm doing a small construction project on my home right now. I followed building costs closely on that project. They're nearly double what we expected at the outset of the project. And this building project, the school building project, is already estimated to be far more expensive than the one that this person helped torpedo last time around. For me, net zero ready would be good enough for now while we have access to state money. We're facing a climate crisis, one that is way bigger than Amherst. We have to do what we can to minimize it. But we're also facing an education crisis in Amherst, and that's one we can actually solve right now on our own with a little New England practicality. Let's do that.
Hello, my name is Dan Levine. I grew up in Amherst and moved back here largely for, I should mention, I attended Wildwood as a child, went through the entire Amherst public school system, have a number of friends and former teachers who I either are or were members of the Amherst public schools faculty. That played a large role in our moving back to Amherst from Los Angeles. We have a child who attends Wildwood in the ILC and have very, very strong feelings about what we have learned to be the case regarding plans for decrease in available size for special needs students, particularly for the ILC and its peer programs at other schools. The idea that there would be less room instead of more, literally more, for these kids is absolutely unacceptable to us. It is completely at odds with everything that we understand to be beneficial about the school system for which we relocated over 3,000 miles. I do not care whatsoever about the implications to my taxes. Most of the people to whom I've spoken agree with this same concern. They recognize the needs, particularly for special needs kids, for more space, for different types of space, and the idea of taking that away from them when they already have more, to give them less, is a betrayal of everything that this town should and historically has stood for. My name again, Dan Levine. My phone number 310-741-4111. I'm a resident of Amherst. Thank you.
We also have, I believe, another voice recording, but I believe it's identical to the one that Ms. Bernal already gave. So if it's okay, I will move to the email comment. Just waiting to get my, oh, there it is. Okay. And just as a reminder, all of the written comment that we received by email is included in this document. I'm going to scroll so that each comment has no more than 3 minutes. And for folks that have already spoken, I'll probably scroll more quickly because it would be a duplicate of what you've already said. But rest assured, it's included in the packet. And hang on just a second. I need to find the document. I'm getting an error message that says I can't share it. I don't have I think it's on my end, not
Sure. I will. I'm happy to. I'm not as good a scroller as you. And so, no, I mean that authentically, like I get the pace wrong. So just please offer feedback about how I'm going, but I shouldn't have an issue sharing it. So I'm happy to do it.
Okay, let me try one more time. It seems to be that my Chrome is not, yeah, I can't get it to.
Can folks see that? Is that okay? Okay, I'll start scrolling.
Yes. Since Kate spoke, I think you can scroll quickly through this. I believe this next comment was also an audio recording, so we can scroll quickly. Thank you.
Since Angelica spoke, I'll go quickly through the next one as well.
Thank you, Mike. Gonna work on my settings to make sure that works next time. So as mentioned, we were going live in meeting, audio recordings, and then email of any unduplicated comments. And now we're going back to last call for live in meeting comments. And I see one hand raised. Let me get my timer. And Lydia Vernon Jones, please unmute yourself.
Good evening. I just have 2 points that I would like to make. One of them my husband made recently in discussing the school project. He worked with several different superintendents. He said, if the superintendent says there's enough space, there's enough space. That a superintendent is not going to risk his own reputation, his own educational philosophy or whatever, by selling us short. The second thing I want to say is that I was on the original net zero bylaw committee, and there's been very little discussion about the recouping of the savings from the energy costs. That once the panels are paid for, maybe that will take 15 years, whatever it takes. For the rest of the life of the building, it will be a bonus. We will be saving, and we can see what's happening with energy costs this week. We know that they're going to be escalating, and that those solar panels are going to save us. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other attendees that would wish to speak? Dorothy Pam.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
We hear you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make a comment that there's been a lot of talk for the number of years about the problems with the open classroom model. And I understand how the particular versions you have in the 2 schools have caused a lot of problems. But understand that one of the purposes behind open classroom was to create flexibility and to try to keep an envelope down while having a variety of spaces that people need. And it's very clear that you do not want that. So we will need more space. And I really just want to say this. I've said it a number of times, but we're not through with COVID. We're not through. We have no idea what the future holds. But we know that schools that have space and that can expand and separate, have the separation and have the indoor-outdoor experience are schools that can stay open. So I really want a energy efficient school, and I want a school that needs to be the size it needs to be for the educational program. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there last call for additional comments from attendees? Seeing none, we will then move on to our next item, which is the superintendent's update. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, for that update.
Sure, I'll be quite brief. A number of the items I would update are on the agenda later. Just wanted to share about some of the professional development activities that are going on in the schools tomorrow. And I think the other piece of the update will be more focused on health and safety, and obviously, what we got a lot of public comment on in terms of the building. But Quaker Farm has participated in 3 of 4 of its social justice workshops that were planned on the early release days throughout the year. Each workshop centers around one of the social justice domains and the standards for that domain: identity, diversity, justice, and action, using the Learning for Justice social justice standards and anti-bias framework. And teachers work in teams to plan specific lessons along those standards. And tomorrow they'll work on lessons specific to the justice domain and standards. At Fort River, teachers are working at learning communities around 4 different topics. The goals for the year: one's around dual language education, another is family community engagement, a third is around enhancing instructional practices, and the 4th one around social emotional development of students. And this PD was developed in concert with teachers to share their knowledge, facilitate discussions, and support colleagues in growth. And they'll be meeting those teams. And at Wildwood, they'll be meeting with teachers will be meeting with their core collaborative teams. They're going over goals they set towards the beginning of the year to assess progress and make adjustments for the remainder of the school year. A lot of the themes are very similar to what the themes I mentioned at Crocker Farm and at Fort River in terms of goals across the district. I think importantly to note that ILC, the Intensive Learning Center, paraeducators, will be meeting with the ILC team, and a lot of the paraeducators receive really high quality professional development, and that's thanks to a change many years ago to include paraeducators workday on the early release days. That wasn't the case when I first joined the district, and it's been a huge boon in terms of support, and their voices really improve our professional development as well. So I just want to give a shout out to prior school committees who made decisions that allowed for paraeducators to participate in high quality professional development, and that certainly happens throughout the day, but just wanted to note that for Wildwood. I think given kind of the number of people here and the topics at hand, I'm going to keep it quite brief for today. If it's okay with the committee, I'll have plenty more to say on other topics throughout the meeting.
Any questions for the superintendent from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chair's update, and I just have a super brief update. So in addition to the many comments that we received tonight during public comment, we've also received about a dozen other emails from 11 community members and teachers about the Ed Plan and the Space Summary. 3 of those emails from 2 community members who also have commented either in writing or in, out loud in public comment tonight expressed a desire for further reductions in the space plan. 8 of those emails from 8 community members expressed support for the most recent proposed space plan, and 1 email from 1 community member expressed a desire for additional space specifically for art. So I wanted to just share that so that the public has an idea of sort of the kinds of input that we're receiving from the community in our email in addition to the public comment. And with that, we'll move on to the school committee updates. So looking to school committee members with any updates on boards that they're representing the Amherst School Committee on, such as JCPC or the Collaborative, or just trying to think of other potential liaison roles. Does anybody have any updates? No updates. I'll remind folks for the next one, but I believe that JCPC has been meeting, and so this would be the opportunity and the time for our representatives on the JCPC to update the full school committee on the work that you are doing and the conversations that are happening there. Irv.
JCPC, we have an upcoming meeting this week, and I would have more to report after that particular meeting. I think that one of the confusions I've had is the overlapping commitments from the Amherst region and an Amherst school committee. But the JCPC has been incredibly active. As you can imagine, this is a really, really important year. And the number of projects that we are reviewing, I would encourage people at least to try to tune into them. I will have more to report at the next meeting, a lot more to report.
Excellent.
And Allison, thank you, Allison, for your gentle nudge.
You're no problem. But I'm also reminded that I neglected one more update in my chair's update, which is that our next meeting will be on March 29th, as opposed to the first Tuesday in April. And that's due to the timing of our budget vote. We need to have that before April 1st. So when we get to future agenda planning, that's the meeting that we'll be planning for. So with that, I'm going to move on to our new and continuing business. And first up, as we all know, is our school building project education plan. And before we dive into that, we're, as has been said, and I'll let Mike introduce this topic as well, but this is a critical and super exciting phase that we're at. And we've invested a lot of time and a lot of discussion and a lot of thought in between meetings, as well as during meetings, several of our meetings on the education plan. Our hope and our goal is to vote tonight on the education plan, which includes the space summary. And we're going to break out the discussion into two parts tonight. We're going to first review and discuss the education program, and then we'll move into the space summary. And we'll do it this way because I think, as Irv eloquently reminded us and talked about at our last meeting, is the education program describes the activities and the people that the building will support, and is the basis for that detailed space plan. So we're going to start there. There's a brief slide deck in our agenda packets. We're going to go through that. We'll pause after slide 4 to take questions or comments on the ed program. And when we get to that, just as a reminder, sort of how we're going to go through this, because I know we all have a lot to say and a lot that we've been thinking about and questions that we have. So we're going to go around the room for questions or comments about the education plan. I'll ask that everyone speak once before anyone speaks twice, and I'll recognize you in order to speak that, so to sort of facilitate that. If a member, any of us, would like to recommend any changes to the education plan, we'll consider those if other members support those. If it's not clear that there is a consensus, a member may make, any one of us may make a motion to make those desired changes. Once we have sort of general consensus on the ed plan, then we'll move into the space summary. And again, at that point, we'll go around the room for questions or comments. Everyone speaks once before anyone speaks twice. And if again, similar to the education program, if a member would like changes, unless a consensus is clear, that member may make a motion to make those desired changes. And then once we're all ready, we'll consider a vote on the overall education plan document. There's a continued portion after our vote on an update on the overall project. And those topics we'll address only after we've gone through the education program and the space summary. So I see a question from Irv.
Not much of a question, but I just wanted to make sure I said this, is that I was incredibly impressed by the number and amounts of comments that came in publicly to this committee, and also to myself personally. It was extraordinary. Some of the comments, some of the public comments were at the level of executive briefings. And I'm mightily impressed by them. I really appreciate that there are people in our community who care so much about our schools that they take the time to write to us, to alert us, to communicate with us in terms of their input into this particular plan. I am really heartened by that particular input.
Thank you, Irv. And I completely agree with you. This is it's a transformative moment for our community, and it's great to see that folks are getting engaged and excited about this project. So with that, Mike, I don't know if you want to introduce anything before we dive into this slide.
Yeah, I think I'll probably just introduce Donna, give her a minute to share her screen. I'll kind of have some comments sprinkled throughout, and certainly we get to space summary. I'll have a little more, some longer comments, but just I really want to thank the feedback we received from committee members, the work with Donna and Margaret and their teams to come up with an educational plan that to me is very exciting. It's exciting to work through, and certainly open to feedback from the committee, not claiming it's perfect, but it is something that I think when I think about our students and I think about our priorities, I think for me, it's reflected in the educational program and system that we want to have for our students. And it feels, it'll take too long to get there because, you have to plan more and build, and Donna and her team have to, do more drawings and get more, I know there's a lot of work between now and then, but we have these moments where we can be aspirational and realistically aspirational in our schools. They don't come all the time. And so, we have that moment and just want to thank, the building committee and then the designers and our OPM for their work on that. But I'll turn it over to Donna, who successfully presented. So thanks, Donna.
Good evening, everyone. We are looking forward to a lively conversation, and I echo what everyone says. No, truly, some communities, there is no empathy towards such an important project that is transformative. So all of this is really helpful and will help shape, your students' lives for 50 plus years. So with that, I'm just going to quickly go through it. Our agenda for this evening, as Allison mentioned, we'll talk about the educational program, pause, review the space summary, and then pause for a vote to hopefully approve both. And then we'll present the update of where we are, which we will be submitting the PDP, the preliminary design program, to MSBA, hopefully next week, March 15th. So again, I know everyone has seen this, but this is, I just need to reiterate it again, that the educational program identifies the programs that are not only offered within the combined Fort River and Wildwood schools, but it's programs that are identified district-wide. And then we also then further define the programs to be offered within the new Amherst Elementary School, which also talks about your programmatic spatial relationships and adjacencies. We understand how important those are to focus on time on learning. And then ultimately, the program defines the space needs, which then transition into a total square footage for the project. The key elements for the educational program, it's a large document, but really quick summary. The average class size for grades K through 1 is 19 students. Grades 2 through 5 is 20 students within 5 classrooms per grade. The Caminantes dual language program will be integrated into the grade level classrooms, and that was part of the 5 classrooms per grade. We have the district-wide special ed programs for AIMS, Building Blocks, and the ILC. And then we do require support services to support both the general education students as well as the special education programs, which are also outlined and identified in the educational program. And then again, lastly, really is just to continue to develop and enhance the co-teaching model, project-based learning, and STEM, which we all know is so important for the accessibility for all students. So I think at that point, I am going to pause.
Yep. And if I could just add, some of the major changes from the last time you looked at this were updates to our ELL, the language around our English language learner programming, as well as our science technology pieces. So those sections saw the more substantive changes since the last time you looked at the document.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Jennifer.
Hi, so I had sent Mike and Donna my thoughts and suggestions on the educational program, and I'm going to just share a high-level summary of the input that I gave them last week. So Wildwood and Fort River each currently have about 350 students right now, for a total of around 700 students. The enrollment in the new building will be 575. So in other words, the new school will have about 3/4 the number of students as Wildwood and Fort River today. And yet, based on the educational program, it seems that there are cases where staffing in the new school is at the same level as the 2 schools combined. So for example, according to the educational program, there's currently 1 psychologist each in Wildwood and Fort River, and 2 will be required at the new school. But with the reduction in students from 700 in the 2 schools combined to 575 in the new school, I would expect to need fewer than 2 FTE psychologists. I don't say this to imply that we shouldn't provide the services that our students need, but just from the math, I would expect that fewer students would require comparably fewer staff. And the same holds true for adjustment counselors and guidance counselors. According to the educational program, there's currently 1 each of these 2 positions at Fort River and Wildwood, and 2 each are stated as a requirement for the new school. Again, the same number of staff for fewer students. And the more staff we have, the more space is needed to house them. And this, I think, is one of the reasons that the total size of the building is, in my opinion, bigger than it needs to be. In addition, the Literacy Professional Center that's described in the educational program sounds to me like a nice to have, not a need to have. There appears to be multiple other spaces in the building to serve as alternate locations for specialized small group or one-on-one instruction and staff collaboration. If we had unlimited funds, we could fulfill all of the nice to haves. But when difficult decisions need to be made to keep the building both within our means as a community and right-sized for the environment, then we need to be willing to forego some of the nice to haves so that we can focus on the need to haves. And lastly, I think that the description of access to the outdoors and outdoor space is insufficient in the educational program. There are many references to visual access by way of windows, and there's description of garden plots. But I think that our students need and deserve ample, accessible, age-appropriate playscapes, space for creative play on fields and hardtops, and continued access to the outdoor learning that's been so important in these last 2 years of the pandemic. That's a summary of my input on the educational program for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter.
So speaking about the education plan and leaving space and cost until later, and just broadly speaking about the opportunity we have before us, we don't often have the chance to act together to benefit each other in a really lasting way, in a lasting and positive way as individuals in a community. And that's what I feel like our committee has tonight. And it's what our town has with this building project, a once in a lifetime opportunity to make a transformational investment in our community that will benefit our children and our town for generations to come. And while of course this is a fiscal investment in a building, it's really an investment, I feel, in providing each child a foundation for their future. And this particular building, as that will be based on this education plan, will be such an innovative, progressive example of how space can help provide that foundation in terms of the design for disability, the support for students with all levels of special needs, support for students with profound emotional and behavioral needs, space that is specifically designed to support English language learners of all levels, Title I supports for low-income students and families, integrated play and outdoor learning, which I feel is sufficiently described and integrated in this description, robust music instruction in the early years. As a community, I think we should all feel really good about these things because a lot of the stuff we don't have to do, and many communities choose not to do. But we choose to do it because it's a community value that we share. And I just, that's like a high level kind of overview of how I feel about the educational plan. And I've mentioned a few times before that I would encourage every resident to read this document. I know it's 35 pages, but download it, scan for what you're interested in. And I just wanted to read one specific example because even in this short paragraph, listen for how many values are expressed in educational programs and how that is creatively used in space. So this is on page 24. It's talking about classroom neighborhoods. In classroom neighborhoods containing multiple spaces with acoustic privacy but in close proximity would create the community feeling that is essential for students and teachers. It would promote the collaboration that is central to our district's core beliefs on how to improve outcomes for students. Having small group rooms in the neighborhood will also promote our sense of inclusion and would allow for flexible grouping consistent with our co-teaching model that is being implemented. The classroom spaces in each neighborhood would offer flexibility for project-based learning that is also at the core of our instructional vision for the district. I mean, that moves me. I mean, that is just a beautiful description of what this building is going to provide our students, a real inspiring promise of space that will be an expression of an education plan that is in itself an expression of our district's mission and our community's values. And it will be implemented in a way that we've never been able to do before. And we've never been able to support our highest needs students, our most vulnerable children, as well as this space will. There's so much good in this plan for so many children that our community, I feel, can feel immensely proud to support. And I look forward to a robust discussion a little bit later about space and cost, and I'm sure we'll get into those details. And then after the committee resolves of what we are resolved to do, I look forward to voting in support of this plan, this wonderful plan as proposed for our community.
Peter, I really appreciate what you just said. I mean, it really resonates with me. What I would like I want to speak from the perspective from two perspectives. One, as an assistant superintendent for children's services at Belchertown State School, in which special students were there. And two, from the perspective of a classroom teacher, which I was for 7 years, from 3rd grade through 6th grade and combinations thereof. So first, when people talk about the need for space and relationship to children with learning disabilities, special needs, etc., I really would invite you to go into a classroom. Just go into one of those classrooms where these students are being taught, and then tell me about their space needs. These are not abstractions. This is not an abstraction. This is reality. If you make it an abstraction, you forget about the reality. So in order to understand the reality, go and visit those schools where those classrooms are happening for the special needs and development delayed students. Go and visit them, sit in them, talk to the teachers. Do not make this an abstraction. This is not an abstraction for a parent. It is not an abstraction for a student. It is not an abstraction for a teacher or a paraprofessional working in those environments. So I really would encourage you to do that. Second, as a classroom teacher, again, do not make it an abstraction to say that the spaces are more than enough for a teacher to teach in. When I look at the spaces, the sample or example or spaces that were presented in the report by Donna and her team, it is remarkable how rich they are. I mean, a learning environment is a learning environment. It is a rich environment. It's not something that you can abstract and say, well, we can get more out of this by making it less space. Think about your own children. Think about our children being in a space that is rich for educational opportunities, not limited by the educational opportunities provided in that space. This education plan really does an incredible job of providing for that. And I really would like everyone to take a pause, look at it, examine it, walk around in it, and not only look at it from your perspective, but look at it from the perspective of the child in the classroom, the teacher in the classroom. And when you do that, then come back and talk to me about space requirements. Thank you.
Ben, is there anything you would like to speak to, comment on?
Yeah, absolutely. So my thoughts on where we should be, right, in terms of perspective is thinking about like the experience of our kids, right? That the purpose of building a brand new building isn't to have like just a bright new shiny building. It's to improve the educational experience of our students. And I think from what I've seen in this educational plan, it absolutely addresses that. But like Irv kind of just threw me for a curve, because when he talks about like stepping into those spaces, I do that every day. And when we're talking about the space that's used by folks, and I'm thinking about like our most vulnerable students, like it's tough to hear us talking about that space being, I don't want to say like, expendable or whatever, but we are, if we're talking about making cuts, right? We're talking about that there are square feet that are expendable. I don't know that I've seen it that way, right? And I don't know that our kids are benefiting from being overcrowded in those spaces. Like, to me, that is the single most important aspect of this educational plan. I'm a basketball coach. Go ahead and cut 1,000 square feet off of the basketball court. I don't care. It's how our kids are going to experience these buildings or this building, I'm sorry, that kind of concerns me the most. And that's where I think that our all of our energy needs to be. And not, I know I mentioned the most vulnerable students. All of our students need to be thought about, and their experience is what we need to be thinking about here. I have a few more things. Hey, hello to our guest there. I have a few more things to add, but it's mostly mathematical for the space section. So
I think I would going last is nice because I can hear and listen to what all of you all are saying, and so I will echo many of the things that I've heard from each of you. I think the one thing that and I share sort of the enthusiasm for this plan. I think, you know, it's a unique opportunity, which has been said many times before tonight. This education plan, like, it lists out all of our values and all of our principles and goals with our schools. And unless we were building a building, I'm not so sure that we would have such a rich document to refer to that describes the education that we seek to provide for our students and our community. And so for that, it is exciting to read through that. It is inspiring to think about that. It is describing, frankly, much of what we're currently doing, as many commenters and many of you all fellow committee members have said, in subpar environments right now. I think the one thing that really stands out to me, and my family, my kids have experienced this as well, is this super collaborative culture that we focus on, not just with our instilling with our students. So, you know, the focus on project-based learning and the emphasis on sort of that group work, shared group work, but also with our professional staff, our teachers and our staff sort of collaborating with each other in support of our students, and in support of their families, who also are supporting our students' education in their learning journeys. And I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think when we talk about, when we get to the space part, it's so important, because that collaborative work can't happen in bathrooms and hallways or stairwells. And I know that people are looking for ways, and I share that desire to sort of make sure that this building is as efficient as possible. And yet collaboration has to be provided space. And so I think, you know, that the Literacy Center is one example of that, where staff and can come together to support the learning of individual students or groups of students, and that requires space. It can't be happening sort of on the sidewalks outside of the building. So I think that is a key part that really stands out in sort of the description for me in this education program, and is in support and really provides a unique education value system in our community, and I think is an important part of this education program. And I share the support that others. I think that the outdoor learning is infused throughout this plan. It may not be in sort of one spot, calling out all the different ways that it is there, but it talks about visual access as well as physical access. And when we look at the space adjacencies that are described in the education program narrative, it does talk about making sure that, from whether it's art or PE or the gym, or the core ed classrooms or the special ed classrooms, that access to the outdoors and integrating the outdoors into the curriculum, as well as the opportunities for play and other physical activity, is included throughout the education program. I am inspired and enthusiastic to support this education program as described tonight. Peter.
So the last thing I wanted to say before we left the general education plan and got into space, my last non-space comment, is just how gratified and moved I am that our community is so committed to our in-district specialized special ed programs. And so I'm talking about AIMS for students on the autistic spectrum who are able to integrate at a higher level with their peers in the classrooms, and ILC for our students with an array of profound needs, cognitive and health and otherwise, and our building blocks program for students with very significant emotional and behavioral needs born of any number of conditions or traumatic experiences. And our community should feel very proud that it hasn't even, I've been so happy that it hasn't even been a discussion of, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have these programs anymore, right? Because most communities, most towns in Massachusetts don't do what we do, and they don't service their students to this degree. They don't value inclusion to this degree. They don't talk about the neurodiversity being a benefit to the greater community. They don't talk about neurodiversity as a social justice dimension, about emotional diversity, about cognitive diversity as a social justice dimension. And I'm so happy to live in a community that values that. Of course, it has a fiscal component where it's good that we save money on out of district placements and being able to do this as well. But the fact that we have the space dedicated to support these students, that we are designing for disability with this building in a way that we absolutely have completely fallen short on in Fort River and Wildwood for decades, is so exciting and inspiring for me. And I just really want to thank the residents of the town for always being supportive of that. This is a big area of the building that could have been really questioned about, should these programs be not part of the plan? And I've not heard people say the program should not be part of the plan, and I'm just very thankful for that.
Irv?
I really want to try to echo Peter in one way, is that when we think about our space needs in relationship to the ed plan, that all of us should go back to the demographics of our school system, the elementary schools. Those demographics tell a story. And that story, if you look at it very closely, will closely link up to what I believe was a really incredible way of looking at our space needs. When you look at the percentage of high need students that are there, the number of other students with special needs that are there, you need to take those things to consideration. The other thing is that it's not only just high need students, but it's students who really need individual attention at every classroom level, and trying to do that in a space that is greatly reduced does not happen. I can tell you that it does not happen, and it impacts on the learning of the students in those classrooms. And one more thing, as all of us look at this educational plan, one of the things that I'm reminded of when I look at the demographics of Amherst elementary schools is that the increase in the number of kids who are low income, moderate income, who are a minority have increased substantially over the years. The converse of that is that as you look out over some number of years in terms of education across this country, is when that group increases, i.e. the minority group, the low income group, increases in population to a school in any given school district, the amount of support by the public decreases. I really do not want that to happen with this school building. These are our kids, regardless of income level, and we owe them the best education that we can afford.
So with regard to the educational program portion of the education plan, sorry for its complexity, are there any further comments or requests for changes? If not, then we'll move on to the space summary portion of the plan. And obviously, as we go through this, the education plan and space summary are uniquely intertwined. So we'll continue talking about these topics, I'm sure. So I'll turn that back over to Donna and Mike to share that space summary.
I'll have Donna go through her slides, and then I'll make some comments after she does, but I think her images would probably do more than my words because they show a lot more than what I could say. But Donna, are you able to? There you go. Perfect. You're muted, Donna. There you are.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm at the office and there's cleaning going on here, so I apologize. But anyway, being architects, everything is so visual to us. And so I'm hoping that what we want to just share are some of the spaces as I try to verbalize what those really meant earlier. So just some really quick spaces that we've talked about that were really kind of hard to articulate. Here are project areas. And again, as you can see with the photo on the left, that this area is like the front porch of the classrooms. This is a project with 3 classrooms that are sharing this project area, which composes the lockers for the students, but it also has additional space for the students to collaborate, work together. You can see these are older students, 5th graders probably, that are all out there doing project work alone. And then you can see to the one on the right, this is just a quick pullout for a student in one of the classrooms that, again, is one of the 3 classrooms adjacent to the space that a teacher can just work with the student independently, just for a quick few minutes without having her to take her to a smaller space down the corridor, and just really just focus on the student's needs while maximizing time on learning. Let's see if I can get this. Oh, too fast. Here's some other ones, right? Every district is a little different. Every school is a little different. The one on the left is in construction right now, but this will give you an idea. It's more geared towards younger students, pre-K through grades 2, but you can see how we've defined the space a little differently to support the needs of younger students with different types of places to sit and chat and work, and also boards that go all the way to the floor so the younger students can actually utilize them as well. But again, it's part of, we're saying it's approximately 150 square feet for every, say, 3 classrooms, still yet to be worked out. We haven't formally laid anything out, but this is also circulation space too. I want everyone to understand that too. It's these are greater than 150. They're probably closer to 600 square feet in total. We're only dedicating approximately 150 for the program related services, and the rest is circulation. So we do take advantage of circulation. We try to maximize it. And if you are able to create pods and things like this, it makes the building smaller and more compact, which will also be a more efficient building with less construction. So, and then the one to the right, as you can see, this too is a little different, a little more playful, a little more color, as you can see. But again, same concept, lockers, storage on all of the uppers. So we know teachers never have enough storage, so we're providing ample amounts of storage for the staff, places for the students to have, small group instruction or individualized instruction, as well as places for their belongings. And here's another space in another district, a little bit tighter, but yet same purpose, again with storage all along the upper walls for the staff. And then here's a project area. And again, we're going to take advantage of every nook and cranny of the school to create spaces for the students. But this is circulation space, so it's not part of the proposed program, but we're able to design it in a way that can actually be used for student engagement and collaboration. The difference between that and, say, a small group breakout space is different. The small breakout spaces are areas that are a little more defined, a little more private, instead of kind of the front porch coming off the classrooms. Here's an example of, we have a small group instruction area that's a little more open, but yet it's not included in where the students will pass by, so they have a little more privacy. And then there's even actually a space behind it for a little more privacy and one-on-one instruction. And I'm actually putting the square footages on these so you all can understand what that space really means and what it looks like. Here's a breakout room. I think our intended square footage was 150. And of course, by the time you finish designing the building, it turned out to be 140. But you can see it's not a large space. This is 140 square feet. And it's enough for a table of 6 that can accommodate a small group instruction. So, here's another example. This is 300 square feet, but this is a specialized teacher who requires a lot of materials for the students. And then here's another small breakout room for 150 square feet, or net floor area, I should say. So you can see these are not large spaces that are generous in any way, that are providing frivolous opportunity or space that might not be needed. Some other specialized spaces. This is a learning center that is 500 square feet. And yes, it's during COVID, so the desks all have to be spread out. But you can see that there's a lot going on in this classroom, and students don't just sit at their desks, especially in specialized spaces. So you can see what 500 square feet means to a teacher with different types of instructional needs. And then here's a speech and language space. It's her office, but it's also where she has instruction. You can see the amount of space that she needs for storage, for wall space. And then this is one table. There's a table behind us for her to have additional students in the space. And then we talked about flexible classrooms, and again, during COVID, but what we have here is a classroom that has 3 areas of instruction. And the spaces, the desks are spread out more than what you would like to see for collaboration purposes. But again, you don't know what we're going to be faced with in the future. So this actually was allowed to separate or space out the desks appropriately. They actually were able to create a small group instruction here. And then there's actually a desk in the back. So when you look at one single classroom, you have 3 activities going on simultaneously. And this is the other teacher in the back of the classroom working with students. And then I just wanted to point out classroom storage. We hear it over and over again. And so what's important to us is to create the appropriate areas for storage, maybe outside in the project areas. We have ample storage above the lockers for staff to utilize for their instructional needs. But we also try to keep the floors free from cabinets and storage so that you have the flexibility to do what you need from a project-based learning. So we've actually created in most of our schools storage behind marker boards and storage underneath, so that we're actually moving the storage out of the actual classroom per se, so that you are maximizing the floor space for educational needs. And then there was conversation about the gym. This is 50% of a 6,000 square foot gym, just for people to put that into perspective. Here's if this is a 6,000 square foot gym, there's a divider that comes down, and there's another class occurring on the other side. This is a school of 800 students with one gym of 6,000 square feet. So you can see, if one class, this is a wonderful space for one class. This would be about 3,000 square feet. And then we talked about what the STEM or STE room or STEAM room, it really is a flexible space for science, technology, engineering, arts. And it is, again, the goal is to develop something that is flexible, so that as your needs change, the space can be utilized. So you can see it almost looks like a classroom. We'll make sure that we have the appropriate sinks, the storage on the walls, make sure that we have access to plugs and other types of needs for technology use. And again, just natural light, but flexibility. So you could see that this could also be used as an art classroom or other needs that may occur over time. So that was the kind of, just so people can maybe start thinking about, as you're looking at numbers, how does that translate to actual physical space? So I hope that's a little helpful. And then we get into, I guess, we get into the design, the space summary now. And again, this is not anything new anyone has seen. We have to look at 2 enrollment options. And then we talk about, and as identified in the ed plan itself, that the number of classrooms per grade for Fort River only is 2 classrooms per grade, and then a combined Fort River Wildwood is 5 classrooms per grade. And this is where we are. So I can share, it's up to you, Allison, how you would like to proceed. I have the space summary itself that we can go through line by line, or we can open it to conversation.
I think we'll open it to conversation. If committee members are asking or would like to make changes, then we can pull up the detailed spreadsheet and look at that together. Mike?
Do you mind if I make a comment before the committee members jump in, or I can wait till after, whatever is better for you?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to start by appreciating the comments from both Peter and Jennifer at last Friday's building committee meeting. I thought they were both really insightful, and I've done a lot of thinking about them. And my takeaway, which hopefully you'll agree, this is a fair summary, or at least what I got from the comments from Peter, was just the urgency about taking care of kids and moving forward at the MSBA allowable pace, which isn't maybe as fast as we'd love to be in terms of getting a new building or add reno building for our kids. But that passion was really helpful. And I really appreciate Jennifer's perspective on compromise. I thought both of those were really helpful in my thinking over the weekend and since then. And what I tried to do tonight, working with Donna and the team, is exactly what you spoke about, a compromise that moves things forward at a reasonable pace through the MSBA process. If you ask me if I like the first model better, the answer would be yes, the 113 square foot one that Donna just showed. But I also think, I understand the realities of space and funds, and worked hard to reduce spaces to find that balance. And I want to be realistic that it may not be the right balance for the committee. For some of you, it may be too much compromise. For others, not enough compromise. Frankly, based on feedback I've received from individual school committee members since the last meeting, I'm not sure we're going to have a unanimous vote tonight, no matter what the square footage ends up being, even if it's amended. And I just want to be realistic about that I really appreciate that. For me, I just try to do my job, which was offer my thoughts on what spaces are needed for students and staff, understanding fiscal realities, And you all are elected officials, and you have your jobs, which are not exactly the same as mine. And sometimes they align and sometimes they don't. And I just want to say I respect everybody, all 5 committee members, the challenge you have tonight, and the challenge of moving forward in this process is not small. And so I just want to share that any changes or differences of opinion, I don't consider as to be disrespectful or personal. It's just really, it's a very, very challenging thing to be able to put together, make sense of, and do. So just want to share some of those reflections. You know, again, for me, I continue to think that this model is a reasonable compromise, and I'll continue to advocate for small group spaces for our high needs population. That's a DESE definition term, high needs spaces. And that's inclusive of our ELL, special ed, and Title I students and staff, as well as our mental health staff that is so critical to keeping students engaged and successful in school. There are countless students that will share stories, and families who will share stories of the impact guidance counselors, adjustment counselors, psychologists have made that have made the work of everybody else in the school possible. That if that mental health work didn't occur, we could have the most wonderful space and the most wonderful teachers, but about accessing it would be a great challenge. So, you know, for me, I'm going to continue to advocate for those spaces. And I'm also going to advocate for the small spaces we have that treat our talented staff as professionals who we expect to collaborate. Collaboration is a core value of our district, and it's an expectation because of the impact that collaboration has directly on our students. When I first joined the district, there was a lot of conversation about pockets of excellence. That was a term that went on a lot, and I think we've done a tremendous amount of work over the last 10 years where you don't hear that term that much anymore. And we don't hear it that much because our principals, our instructional leaders, our central office staff have promoted collaboration or bring that excellence and broaden it. And when we have wonderful things happening in one classroom, we talk about it. How do we bring that out, and how do we celebrate the wonderful work of teachers so that other teachers can learn for that? And that's been a core value of our district for many years. So for me, I believe that reducing spaces for students to whom we owe educational debt to, and for the staff who work with these students, in order to increase the spaces that all students utilize, I totally get it. It's understandable, but for me, it's not what I'm going to recommend. In terms of the literacy room, that I think there's been some conversation about it, just for context, our current book closets at Wildwood and Fort River with 350 students are 480 square feet. So they exist. They're awful spaces in the inside guts of the building. It's the only way, sorry for the language, but that's literally where they are. No one would want to collaborate in those spaces. They have pipes running through them. So they're book closets, right? And they achieve their purpose. If you scaled up for a 575 student school from 350, that would scale to 789 feet, which is pretty darn close to what's being recommended here about for small space for collaboration. But these are not spaces that don't exist in our current schools. They do. They don't exist with small spots for staff members to be collaborating. And so, you know, to me, it's a reasonable amount of space. I think the last two things I want to say are, you know, it's unfortunate, in my opinion, that the net zero bylaw has been placed by some into conflict with the educational program. I absolutely understand the concerns of advocates for the net zero bylaw, and I'm very empathetic to their concerns. I want to be clear, I've not expressed any viewpoint in conflict with the bylaw, and I understand the positive implications on my end of the long-term operational savings of having the most energy efficient building. The cost benefits of the topic's likely going to play out on a couple other boards and committees. But for me, there is no conflict between that. And I haven't heard from school committee members, frankly, I could have missed something, any critique of the net zero bylaw or conflict with the educational program. So, you know, I've heard that feedback a bunch of times, and I think it's very reasonable. But for folks who are very passionate about the net zero piece, I get it. And I personally don't feel any conflict with what's being recommended tonight and the heartfelt and scientific-based passion that folks are bringing to that. I think finally, I don't want to repeat the mistakes made the last few times we've had building projects and created the buildings we have now. And Fort River and Wildwood are obvious, but perhaps less well known is Crocker Farms Preschool, which was completed in 2002. It was completed at a time where there was a belief that full inclusion was the model that we needed, and there wasn't any flexibility to the building. If not for the ability to usurp large, and usurp is the term I'll use, but graciously give is perhaps a different way to put it, from the K-6 Crocker Farm perspective, space to the preschool, it wouldn't be able to educate its students. It simply would not. And that was true as recently as 4 years after the new construction was done. You know, I got to Crocker Farm a couple years after that. it wasn't, when I got there, they were already utilizing space that was not designed for the preschool program. And we do that because, of course, we take care of kids, and our youngest learners are it's incredibly critical the work our preschool staff does. But I fear the same will occur if we continue to reduce our program for this new building, except we won't have a fail-safe of another building right next to it where additional students can go. I'm certainly open for any questions, comments. There's a number of other people on the call from the staff level. There's some folks who are here who can answer questions about Title I intervention programming. There's some folks here on special ed, mental health, that support, as well as ELL. So anything I can't answer, we have some good folks here who can help with that if there are questions from the committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So now, as mentioned, we'll go through any questions or comments or requests for changes, and we'll go around the horn. You can raise your hand, but I'm going to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak first before we go to second comments. And with that, looking to see if folks. Peter.
So I have a number of detailed questions on some of the items and one proposal to make, but I'll save that for later because I'll just make one comment now, which is about, generally speaking, what I think the best way is for the community to approach determining space levels. I think one thing we've definitely seen in the public comment and feedback is that people approach this topic differently in terms of how do you arrive at what is appropriate for the education plan. So I just want to share my view. And it really starts from the place of our kids are not commodities. This is not assembly line production of mass market goods, the inefficiencies of which can be auto-determined by spreadsheet analysis. These are children with needs that go far beyond the scope of what a quantitative calculation or comparison chart of projects can fully capture. What we're doing here with this education plan, in my view, isn't a spreadsheet exercise, it's a human endeavor. So comparative data analysis can suggest good questions to ask, and can be helpful in that regard. But what's not valid, in my view, is to then jump to conclusions that major cuts to spaces are okay without first listening to our educational leaders, and I'm glad that we have a number of them here tonight, about the impact that those changes would have on children. We have to look at the individual needs of our district that the students will need to support for the next 50 years that are different than other districts. The details of this ed plan and how that implements what it will take to provide that support. And then we'll make a determination. And so we have asked these questions at length and in great detail of our education leaders, because they're the ones with the experience and knowledge who are in the best position to make these evaluations. And they've given us the detailed explanations for why these spaces are needed and why further reductions from the current proposal would significantly and negatively impact our ability to meet the needs of our students now and into the future. Having heard that, I then don't see how it's justifiable to reject their testimony because it doesn't happen to calculate out to a space number I want. And to reject it on the basis of what? The assessments of Dr. Morris, Dr. Brady are incompetent or deceptive and not forthcoming, or they don't have as much knowledge and experience as I do at understanding and assessing educational need. I mean, this point of view of Amherst exceptionalism that we're all familiar with. Like, because I feel strongly about something, I therefore know better. Like I know the needs of building blocks, the program for children who need the most intense emotional and behavioral support, therapy for trauma. I know what they need better than Dr. Morris or Dr. Brady. I should reject their point of view and validate their knowledge and experience and substitute it for my own. I should claim to know staffing levels, small room use frequency, the nuances and complexity of elementary educational needs across a wide spectrum of age and ability, all better than the superintendent because I want to hit a number. I don't see how that's appropriate point of view or analysis to make these determinations. I trust the evaluations of Dr. Morris, Dr. Brady, and the rest of our educational leaders. They have an established, earned credibility in our schools, and I see no reason to believe that they're not providing us accurate, informed, honest assessments that are sensitive to cost efficiency and mindful of real educational need. So I'll continue to ask questions tonight, expect explanations, and hold them accountable while at the same time acknowledging they have a perspective on educational need and impact that I do not. That's the basis of my decision-making on space tonight, and why, generally speaking, I'm confident that the superintendent's proposal does not include extra unnecessary or nice-to-have space.
Other comments? Irv.
Peter, I really appreciate what you just said, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, really targeted and right on. Really right on. And I would invite all of us and all those people who are listening to or viewing this to understand exactly what Peter just said. All of us would, if we are parents, want to provide the best for our kids. We want to do it in such a way that allows them to thrive and to move on with their lives. All of us want our kids to feel protected, loved, secured, respected, which is the same thing a school teacher wants for their kids in a classroom. Just speaking, when I just go back and put myself in that in a classroom, what it means to be in a classroom with 15 to 25 other little human beings, and you are charged with their development, and you are charged with protecting them, loving them, making them feel secure. It is an incredible responsibility. And that responsibility cannot be carried out in an environment in which that which is not conducive to their learning. When I look back at the education plan, I look back at what the administration has proposed, I look back at the space summary, I look back at the reductions that have been made, and I'll tell you, personally, I really didn't really like some of the reductions, because I looked at them in relationship to what it meant for classroom spaces, for collaborative spaces, for special spaces, for gyms. I really, really did not like them. However, when I looked at it overall, I said, all right, let me look at it from the point of view of someone who would be walking around, working in those spaces. Is this something that is workable? And I would say yes. Is it something that is ideal? I would say no. However, it is something that I think that the community can move forward with. And that's where I come down. Can we move forward with this plan that is put before us? And for me, I say, yes, we can.
Thank you. Jennifer.
So I'm looking at this project from many different perspectives and point of views. And one of those perspectives is that I'm a single parent who works full-time and owns a house I can't afford. I am perpetually in arrears on my property taxes. It's the first bill I put off paying or don't pay in full when my finances are tight, which is most of the time. That being said, as a voter, I fully intend to vote in favor of the debt exclusion override next year to pay for this school building. The increase in my property tax bill won't force me to move out of town, but it will impact my quality of life. It will reduce my ability to pay my bills on time and to pay for extra things like extracurricular activities and hobbies for myself and my child. But as a taxpayer and as a voter, I'm all in. As an elected official, my job is to make sure that residents like me who struggle to make ends meet, whether they're homeowners or renters, are not faced with a higher tax burden than is absolutely necessary for a school project that meets the educational needs of our students. In addition, there will be those who will be pushed out of town due to higher rents and higher property taxes. Already, living in Amherst is out of reach for many families. If we make it even harder to live here, then who is this school for? Is it only for people who can afford the higher tax bill or the higher rent that results from the higher tax bill? We say that our mission is the academic achievement of every student learning in a system dedicated to social justice and multiculturalism. But there's no social justice or equity in a town that only resourced families can afford to live in. We know that the size of the building is just one element of the cost. All of the other elements that go into the cost of the project are out of our control, but this one thing is within our control. At each step in this process, each individual or group that makes decisions, whether it's the school committee, the school building committee, or the town council, has to do their part to develop a reasonably sized and priced building that meets the educational needs of our students and that our community can support, and that is a net zero building. While each body has a different piece of the total picture, we can't make decisions in a vacuum. We have to consider the whole picture. Tonight, it's this body's moment to do our part. We need to hand off to the school building committee an educational plan that meets the needs of our students and a space summary and total square footage that sets them up for success in terms of completing this project at a cost that the community can bear. And then it will be the responsibility of the town council and the voters to approve the tax increase and the borrowing. But we get to go first tonight, and we need to set ourselves up and to set this project up for success. A right-sized building is the right choice for fiscal reasons as well as for environmental reasons. This will be the first major town project to be built under our excellent net zero bylaw. And there is already talk in the town council about weakening the net zero bylaw to control the cost of this project. We don't want that to be this project's legacy. We don't want to look back and say that we had a great net zero bylaw, but we revised it so that we could afford the school project. We owe it to our students, both our current students and the ones who will be inhabiting this building for 50 years to come, to deliver a right-sized net zero building. All that being said, I'm not planning on suggesting any reductions to the current proposed plan, but I also could not support any increases to it.
Ben.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna kind of speak practically to the situations that exist, right? So we have two buildings with 82,000 square feet of usable space, right? Total 164,000. Then we're talking about condensing down to 105,000 square feet of usable space, right? That's just numbers, right? Let's think about like the reality of the situation when we walk into both of those schools. They are both packed to the gills, right? Your kids go to school in a cafeteria. Like their class is a cafeteria. We have core classrooms in art rooms and music rooms, and like I like the sound of art on a cart. It's got like this phonetic ring. It also has this like depressing, soul crushing like reality to it, right? And that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're talking about. And we got to this place because of some decisions folks made 50 years ago, right? I can talk offline about what I think about those decisions and how we got here. But what I want us all to think about is we don't want the next group that comes along to talk about us making these rash decisions, right? That led to us having this space crunch. We're in a space crunch right now, right? We didn't anticipate it. That's not what we were looking for. But I think our kids deserve better. Our grandkids deserve better. The future of this town deserves a better building. And here's the thing: like I'm a blue collar single dad. Like I'm not rich enough to be able to like differentiate between a big number and a big number, right? Like no matter what we spend on this school, it's not going to be like $100,000, right? Like we're not talking about purchasing a condo here. We're talking about building a building that's going to last for 50 years, right? It's not going to be cheap by any means. And I don't think that we benefit ourselves or the future of this town to nickel and dime it by looking at, cutting where we can cut because it seems like it's going to cut costs now, right? We're looking at basically the town is going to spend for this school about twice what our annual budget is for our schools, right? That's probably safe to say. To me, it's a huge number that we spend consistently anyway, right? In lobbing off $5 million here or there. Yes, it's great, but what is the actual impact? Is the dollar value worth more than the educational value? Is it worth more than the future of our town? That's how I look at this. And like I say, I'm not rich enough to think in terms of millions and millions of dollars. Like the difference between spending $1 million today that'll impact a kid for the rest of their life is worth it to me. So it's one of those, is the juice worth the squeeze kind of things.
So I have enjoyed hearing everybody's thoughtful and passionate comments on this. And I think, so I'm trying to think of sort of what more can I add to this conversation, because I think a lot of good points have been made. We spent over 2 hours a couple weeks ago going through every single line item to make sure that we really understood how every square foot of the space in the space summary connects to and supports to our educational program that we all just talked about supporting, and not only supporting, but being proud of and inspired, and recognizing and acknowledging that people move to this town because of that education philosophy that we have. We've reduced, the plan that we're looking at today is a reduction of about 8,000 square feet. And I think I share Irv's reaction as well. In fact, I worried those reductions from the first draft might be too much. But after listening to those responses to the questions that we asked, all of us asked, and then frankly going back and re-listening to them, I watched the recording again. I trust the professional opinion, the expert opinion of the design team and our district leadership and our teachers and staff that we're not compromising the ed program to make these reductions. I've also heard, and we heard some of that tonight in public comment, that some people are asserting that this reduced space plan is still excessive in size compared to other building projects, including our one 6 years ago. These assertions are based on verifiably false claims that our education programs and student needs have not changed in the 6 years since the last building project. Claims that ignore data that is readily available, and more importantly, ignore the expert and professional perspective of our superintendent, Dr. Brady, and many others in our district, as well as our design team. So I trust their professional opinion that further reductions would have a significant and negative impact on our student experience and education. This attention, as several of you have pointed out, is important. The space plan is important. It's a significant contributor to the total cost to the town and taxpayers. But it is just one. It just happens to be the one that we're one of many critical contributors to cost, but those we're not deciding on tonight. And yes, we have a critical role to play. But our role is to support the education program. And we need to support the needs of our students with the school plan. I also want to add, I've heard a lot of people talk about this as a net zero project. It's not a net zero project. It's a school building project. It can and will be a net zero building, but first and foremost, it needs to be a school. And I'm focused on ensuring that it meets the educational needs of our students first. I personally am excited and proud to support this education plan and space summary. It defines a building that's right-sized for our students, for the educational programs that they need, and for the staff who support them. It describes a school that will continue to support the high-quality education we're providing today to our richly diverse student community for the next 50 years. So I don't see any changes that I would make or recommend or ask for in the space summary. I'm also not sure that I heard any of my colleagues asking for space changes, but I'm seeing a hand raised. So Peter.
Yeah, so I don't want to ask multiple questions at once, so I'll just go one at a time here. So just in terms of the general topic of cost, I agree with the comment before that we need to be very cognizant of what we are doing to the microeconomic picture of our residents and the impact on taxpayers, and the impact to our town's other fiscal needs beyond this project, even though we're the school committee and this is our purview, which is why I supported the last project. And I don't say this to relitigate that decision. Whether or not you thought that was the right decision or not the last time for the town to reject the bond authorization for the previous project is to me inconsequential now. But the fact is that happened, and we did it with eyes wide open to cost escalation. We knew this at the time. We shouted it from the rooftops at the time. But a consequence of freely rejecting the last project was going to be millions of dollars of cost escalation that would negatively impact the finances of the town and our residents. And here we are. And it's not an insignificant cost. In 5 years, MSBA new cost construction has gone up 31%. And it's, and this building won't be opening until 2026. So we have more to go there. And at the estimates we're looking at for the projects that just were shared with us last week, and that we'll talk about on the next item, that's at least $20 million. So I don't say that to like beat anybody over the head with shame or anything, but as a town, when we're talking big picture about our reaction to these prices and the variables that we can alter and who should pay the price, our children should not pay the price for our decision to accumulate this cost. So that's just my comment on cost. But I'll turn it into a question to Dr. Morris, because I've said I was going to get to these. So Dr. Morris, I don't want to ask you like 20 different questions about 20 different line items. So it's really just the same question for about a dozen of these different line items, because I want to be respectful that we've heard some of this in public comment. So when you were allocating the space and designing it, can you talk about, generally speaking, how you right-sized the space for staffing levels, projected enrollment numbers, and room space frequency? In other words, will this space be the space that is needed for the number of staff that we expect to have, the number of students we expect to service? Will these buildings or these rooms be in use most of the day?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It's interesting. So Donna did our second session we did for staff members, and I'm sure Donna remembers one of the pieces of feedback was, I don't see enough small group rooms. Now, I think given the flexibility of the breakout spaces and some of the other things, I think we're sufficient. But I think education doesn't exist, in this kind of sitcom, everyone stays in the same room for the period world that perhaps never really existed because it was masked over by students, never getting in the regular classroom. But kind of we have flexibility. Students are moving throughout the day to different spaces, and it's not just because of special needs or ELL status. It's because of project-based learning. So, we do think about that. We think about part-time staff and full-time staff, and how do we maximize that? Because in this building, like our current buildings, we will have part-time staff. Not everyone will be a full-time staff member, but when we're thinking about parking spots, for instance, we got to make sure that if some of the part-time staff are there concurrently, that they have a place to park. And so, I think we think about all of those things, all of those pieces. And I think the challenge is that every year, different groups of students have different needs and different strengths. And we want to be flexible enough where we can support our students regardless of the skills they bring to us and the skills they need further development in. So absolutely, we do think about all of those dimensions. I think if you walk in our schools now, you will see, much like this building would be, you see that anytime there's an inch of space, someone will take it and make good use of it, right? There's not empty rooms that you walk in. I see Ben nodding his head because he does a lot of walking through the building. And, we've had, as been noted, we've had declining enrollment. So one would think, for instance, a building in one other district I work for that's probably the most under-enrolled, you don't walk by empty rooms, right? People, will find spaces. And if money was no object, we'd build kind of more spaces because that's the nature of learning. I think we want to build these small learning communities. And when we have our specialists, just one thing, that I was talking to a staff member today about is it's not just about, oh, we have this number of students receiving intervention or this number of students receiving ELL service or special ed. It's the discrete skills that students are working on. So, having some of these small group spaces allows us to group students from multiple classes to work on the same discrete skill that inclusion doesn't work as well for, because it's really inefficient, right? So if we were trying to do that all inclusion, we need a whole lot more staff. But if you have 4 fourth grader or 4 first graders in one class and 3 in another, all struggling with a discrete instructional reading skill, you can pull them, right? And you can work on that. And it doesn't mean one person has to go to multiple rooms, because all of a sudden now you need 2 people. And so for me, it's a sufficient amount of space, but it does recognize an instructional model that probably many of us adults didn't realize when we were kids, because that's not how we were taught. The classroom itself was the center, or it appeared to be the center for a much greater number of students now that we have more flexibility. And I think we're more responsive to individual and group needs. So sorry, long-winded answer, but it was a long-winded question in fairness. So wanted to, answer that. But I'm excited for what this building can offer. And you see those pictures that Donna shared, and it's not just about everything looks new and nice. That certainly helps. But it's actually about the flexibility from a classroom teacher perspective to have breakout spaces. And, I think about kindergarten rooms where there are paraeducators in all of our kindergarten spaces, and what they could do if they could work, and they're so talented, what they could do if they had a discrete space to work with individual students, let alone ELL special ed intervention folks, to be able to do that, and how it could functionally change the kind of teaching we want to do, the project-based learning we want to have, that we're constrained in some ways by. And I think the challenge for me, isn't so much about this building. It's about, what do we do at Crocker Farm, which has double-barreled hallways with none of these breakout spaces, essentially? And how do we make sure that we're supporting the professional learning of the staff members at that building? We're not going to have the same types. It's not about square footage. It's actually about design. And how do we support them over time? So that's a conversation for another day. But my concern is much more about, how do we provide the same kind of education at a school that doesn't have the flexibility and design that this one will?
Other questions? Or are we ready to move to a vote? Peter.
I have like 3 more questions and then a proposed change. So I'm happy just to keep raising my hand and putting it down if you want. I don't know how you, I'll just do my second one. So on Dr. Morris, on the ELL and ILC space. So we heard some pretty compelling public comment from staff on the front lines in these spaces, concerned about that this isn't enough space for flexibility for the future. Can you talk about that and how you right-sized this space, and whether you think that there are, is this the point where that experienced the most pain in the reductions, or do you think it's appropriate? Is it maybe a different space delivery model than our current staff are used to?
Yeah, so I'll start with the ILC. First of all, I'm not going to say that staff who make public comment are wrong. So I just want to be really clear on that. I'll offer my perspective, but I really appreciate staff who are sharing their personal and professional experiences. So from my perspective, the difference on the ILC is right now, there's that third classroom is a combination of classroom / movement room. And we've broken those out in this space. So it is true that the 3 classrooms are larger in the ILC than our current, but that's inclusive of a movement room. And since that's a separate space in this model, I feel like, yes, the rooms are smaller, but that movement room sort of cuts into the educational space in that third ILC classroom currently. So everything they said is true. And for me, I think it's a sufficient compromise because they have a distinct movement room instead of being integrated into one of the classrooms. I think the ELL, the concerns, I certainly hear them. I think having that shared space, I think it'll be sufficient. I think there's concerns, as Ms. Richardson said, about over time, what if our population expands? And that's where, some of the flexibility that's built into the building, perhaps would help with that, and some of the small group spaces that are integrated into the grade levels. So I hear those concerns. For me, those are compromises I'm comfortable with. I'm not saying I'm right, but when I think about the enrollments in both of those programs and the spaces and how they're situated, I think one thing to note is that our ELL spaces have not typically in our schools, including Crocker Farm, been well integrated into the program. So I think that's the other thing that makes me feel a little more comfortable is the ELL spaces. And Donna, showed this when she, to me, is just, and to staff, who attended the session, they can be much better integrated into the spaces, and that provides a greater level of flexibility than right now, where they're often isolated, not in classroom communities, because there is no such thing as classrooms communities when you have double-barreled hallway of classrooms. So for me, I think that flexibility will offer perhaps some efficiencies in space that are more doable because of the difference in isolation and where they're located. And that's true for ILC as well. I mean, you would never design a building where any of our specialized programs at either of the schools were designed. I mean, DESE wouldn't allow us to do that if we were designing a school, because they're part of this process. And they say, no, it has to be integrated in. And that's not the model for a whole host of reasons we have at Wildwood and Fort River. So it is a compromise. I want to be really clear on that. I think it's one that can work because of how the building is designed.
I was just going to say, since nobody else is raising their hand, you can continue, Peter.
Okay. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. It's another example, by the way, of something I wanted to say earlier, which is, this we've already, and I think Irv and Allison echoed this before, but there've already been significant loss of flexibility in the 114 to the current proposal. So I just want to put a finer point on that. So two more. So on the gym, so I understand that a 6,000 square foot gym is a place where, if we're going to be making reductions, is a place where we can do it with less significant impact to the educational program. So, initially that 4,000 level looks okay to me, but then I think about, is there another level above 4, below 6 that gives us more multi-use functionality, or is 4,000 big enough such that is a space that's flexible enough for multi-use? I just don't want this to be too simplistic a binary choice between, full bore 6,000 versus 4. If we're talking about flexibility and where small changes can lead to big improvements, I don't know. So which do I ask the question?
Yeah, so I'll start, and maybe Donna could jump in, because we've had some conversations about how to do this. And by the way, I met with the specialist teachers today across our schools. They wanted to talk about multiple things. This was one of them, not just the gym, but space. So I get some good feedback from that group as well. Donna, that was like 2 hours ago, so I wasn't able to connect back with you in the interim. So I think for me, the gym piece is really about how you design and how you structure the gym. And so I had an initial conversation with Donna and her team about how you would divide the 4,000. You're not going to divide it into half, because that's not big enough to have a class in. But one of the things that's been so critical, and I heard this from our specialist teachers, including our PE teachers today, this afternoon, was to be able to have small groups of students, particularly from specialized programs, but not exclusively, be able to access parts of the gym. And so, Donna shared with me that, if you think about an average class of 20 kids, right, that's what we're talking about here, 3,000 square feet should be sufficient. That's more than we have at Crocker Farm for your average gym class activity. So one of the things that we started having discussions about is how might you be able to subdivide the gym not in half, but maybe into 3/4, 1/4. So there would be a large enough space for full use of the gym, while also a smaller space. And one of the things that I've heard some feedback on is that actually might be better. So sometimes when you have students in specialized programs, having a 4,000, right now 3,600 square foot gym, it's a really large space. And actually having a smaller but sufficient space for there to be movement in, to shoot hoops or do things, might be beneficial for them. But Don, I don't know if you have more to add. I mean, there's, the technical details are, beyond me, but luckily you're on the call.
I think, everyone, a 6,000 square foot gym really is sufficient for 2 full-size classrooms, or 2 full-size classes to occur simultaneously. But people more so gravitate towards the 6,000 because it is a community resource, right? You can get a full-size high school basketball court in there. So, there becomes a tipping point of when you need to duplicate services or spaces such as art and music, and then the PE. But Amherst has been able to be extremely efficient with their scheduling, that they're confident that on the one-off occasion you can use the steam room if you need an extra art, and then same, for the music or the gym. So based on that and the images that I showed you, that was 3,000 square feet. There are many times we go into schools that have 6,000 square feet of gym space, and almost to Mike's point, they're spread out so much that it's almost hard to engage them all, right? So I think from an educational perspective, that 3,000 is adequate per class. You certainly don't need anything more than that, and that we can divide it, and we'll continue these conversations on what works best and what the needs are that could occur simultaneously while gen ed PE class is occurring, and how best to break out the space and provide certain elements for other activities.
Did you have one more question, Peter?
Yep, this is the last one. Thank you for your patience. So this is the one line item that I was thinking about asking to change. And before I say that, it's a small change, but I'm also cognizant of comment from my colleague earlier of perhaps wanting to support this, but definitely not if there's additions to space. And so if there's a trade-off here where we can add a little to one line item and take away a little from another line item where it could be appropriate, this is something I'm interested in, but I want to run it by you, Dr. Morris. So the OTPT line, the OTPT room, the main occupational therapy, physical therapy room, went from 950 to 750. So that's a pretty big reduction in an individual room, like 20% reduction. And from the conversations that we had last time, and then I followed up with you after the meeting, it seemed like that was pretty tight. And I remember Ben as well expressing some concern about that. We heard a little bit in public comment. I also talked to some people through CPAC. Of all the line items, that seems to be the one that I haven't yet heard a comfort level that, oh yeah, for decades, 750 is going to suit our needs. Is this a place where we can maybe bump it up to, say, I don't know, 800 or a little more than that, and take away 50 square feet from another line item in such a way that gives us some more use and flexibility for this space?
So we could. Another way to think about this, and I'd have to bring up the document, which I can do right now, is to think about, sorry, let me just, there we are. Yeah, I mean, we could. I don't know what other item you're thinking of reducing to make up for it, but it's certainly something that could be reduced. Donna has her hand up, though, as well.
Donna?
Thank you. Just, Peter, to that, I think what's important more so for the space is how it's designed and making sure that it can accommodate. You can design a 900 square foot PT space that won't meet the needs of the students. You need to make sure that there's radius for the swing. You need to make sure that there's separation of other activities that occur there. But whether it's 750 or 800 square feet, I think making sure that you have the right design and layout of the space is what's going to be the most important for this space. And I think the other conversation that we've had is, are OT and PT services potentially going to occur simultaneously? And then the other component of that is that we've also identified this motor room or sensory room for the ILC program, which also can be used if there's PT services occurring in the quote unquote OT-PT space. So I think there's flexibility. This is also a very special program that I feel pretty passionate about. It's so important to make sure that these kids are getting the services, but in a safe environment, that I wouldn't suggest going smaller than this, but we've done it for 750 square feet.
Peter?
So thank you both for that explanation. Yeah, I guess, Dr. Morris, I just wanted to give you and staff an opportunity just to, if that was something that you were, anxious about, that you were hoping, we would talk about. It was just the one line item that really stuck out to me that I was wondering if we were being too penny wise on. But if you're not expressing a super high degree of concern with the flexibility, then I'm okay not proposing the change, and therefore I don't have any other changes, and I'm comfortable just speaking for myself supporting this proposal with the space as indicated without change.
Did you have anything to add, Mike? No.
No, I think having the dedicated ILC. I was going to say what Donna said, so I won't spend more time repeating what I think Donna said clearly.
If there's no more questions, comments, or requested changes, just scanning the screen, then I will propose that we move to a vote, and I'll make a motion that we approve the education plan with the space summary as presented to us this evening for submission along with the PDP to the MSBA.
Second.
Moved by McDonald and seconded by Shao. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote, and I'm just going in order on my screen. Irv?
Irv, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Ben?
Ben, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
And Allison, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And with that, before we exit, it's an incredibly exciting milestone for our community. And I believe this plan is one that we can all get behind and be super proud and inspired about. And I look forward to the next phases of this transformative, to borrow everybody's words, transformative project for the community. So thank you, Donna and team, for joining us again and sticking with us through all of this. With that, we'll move on to the building update. And that slide deck is also in our packet in the next item. So I will turn it back over to Mike and Donna for that update.
Sure. So I think Donna will share her slides. And I think this is actually a really nice transition. I want to thank the committee for moving through that and the good dialogue, not just tonight, but prior nights as well. And this is one of the things we'll aspire to do, myself, Ben, and certainly the team, is to keep the school committee updated throughout the process, because while this was the primary vote that occurs for the school committee, it's not like you're going to stop caring about the project, right? At least I hope not, and I find it unlikely. So this is a nice segue actually to what will be more routinized, I think, in coming meetings, is making sure the school committee is updated on the work of the building committee, decisions that are coming up. So as school members, did last time and will continue to do, to show an interest and perhaps even express opinions on matters as we move forward. But with that, I'll turn it to Donna.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all. This is really a huge milestone, and we truly could not be happier. So thank you for your vote of support and for the project. And I think we can comfortably say, with now knowing what the square footage is of the building, that we will be submitting the PDP to MSBA on March 15th. And other aspects of the PDP, this is just to kind of bring everyone up to the other aspects of the project. You obviously, we focused on the educational program. We've talked about the existing conditions. And then we've started to establish design parameters pretty loosely at this point. We'll be focusing more on those as we move forward. And then as far as the capital budget statement, I think there's been a little bit of confusion, because MSBA uses similar terms for different types of requirements. The capital budget statement at PDP is where the town is required to provide a capital budget statement that provides MSBA with an overview of Amherst's financial health, reserves, bond rating, and capital plan to state the intention to seek a debt exclusion for the school. So that's solely the intent at PDP. What occurs later is this operating budget, which they also call a budget statement, not capital budget, but a budget statement, I think is the term that they use. And what that is for, which will occur, I think at PSR at the next submission to MSBA, is how the building or how the project differs from your current staff levels, current utilities, current operating expenses. So they're going to ask you to prepare, you know, the last 3 years of operating expenses, which might look a little different than they have previous years, but, and just to make sure that the town is aware of any increase or could be decrease of operating costs for when the project's complete. So I just want to make clear that for this PDP, it's solely just to establish the capital's bond capacity and plan for the project. So, and then again, we'll talk about and develop and evaluate alternatives. And again, before I jump to the alternatives, again, we're not selecting any, we're not selecting options at this point. Right now, what we're looking at is eliminating any that do not kind of meet the criteria, educational criteria or other criteria the town has that don't deserve further evaluation. So order of magnitude, budget numbers that we're using right now, we are a little conservative as we go through these, and I'll talk a little bit more to that. But right now, per the MSBA guidelines, so what you're seeing is what we're going to be submitting to MSBA with a little narrative, which is what I'm demonstrating tonight. But we're going to be proposing, it's our understanding the building committee will be voting on Friday, yeah, what options or which alternatives they would like to move forward to continue to explore. So we understand the 165 student enrollment certificate and option really does not meet the educational program. So we will be informing MSBA that that just doesn't necessarily work for many reasons, but we will carry those costs for comparative purposes moving forward. In the meantime, our recommendation would be to allow the district to continue to study these 4 alternatives. A renovation and addition at the Fort River School. Right now, preliminarily, now that we have the square footage, we'll start working with the district to determine the spatial relationships and adjacencies and really spend a little more time on how we can make this as efficient as possible. But this is approximately 108,000 square feet compared to the 105 by 750. But other components of this, and I know there's been conversations about the differences between the Fort River site and the Wildwood site. Aspects that are consistent, enough parking for all of the staff on both sites. And what you're going to see is a very similar layout or footprint of a building because you have 2 exact existing buildings. So we can apply the same approach to either, and new construction. Other aspects of the sites that are similar, geothermal. What you'll see is a geothermal well with tons of dots, and we apologize that it actually is a little distracting to the overall site plan. We'll be updating these, but identifying that geothermal can fit at both sites and that there's sufficient play space and adequate play space, not only for probably, actually we have probably 3 groupings of students, the younger students and the older students, and making sure that they're fully accessible for all students, right? So there'll be probably 2 play structures or 2 areas for play. And then we also want to start exploring outdoor learning because we understand the importance of that. The difference with Fort River, whether it's a renovation or addition, is that we'll be disturbing quite a bit of the site, as you can see. We will need to locate the geothermal wells. We haven't identified exactly where they'll go, but you do want them as close to the building as possible. So as we're ripping up the ground, we feel we need to replace what we've disturbed. And that can be in the form of what we've done here is that we're saying we're replacing in kind the fields that currently exist on the site. If that's a decision that the building committee and the town feels is not necessary, then we can have that conversation down the road. But for right now, for costing purposes, we always replicate in kind when we disturb a site. You'll see that there's significant amount of site work that is going to occur that we're going to have to replicate. We also have to talk about contractor laydown, that they're going to need areas. So you can assume most of the site will be disturbed during the construction. So other than that, we will be replicating the fields that are disturbed at the Fort River site. A new school, whether we'll continue to explore whether it's a 2-story or 3-story, there are benefits of both, but we really want to focus. The next step is going to be focusing on the spatial relationships and adjacencies and what's really works well educationally, and then how that might impact the footprint, which may impact the cost. So we'll be looking at all three simultaneously. But as you can see here, there's an outline of the existing building. We will be constructing a new building just south of the existing building. And we've identified one potential location for the geothermal well field over here. The other thing I want to point out too is that the team, your net zero, your town council, your building committee, all of you, a solution to your net zero has not been identified. Geothermal, so this is the ground source heat that you could get out of a geothermal, and there's also air source. And we're going to be working with the net zero folks to look at life cycle costs for both upfront costs, the duration, and how much energy you're saving with both. So none of these are foregone conclusions. They all need to be continued to be evaluated and vetted for multiple reasons. So for right now, we've identified a geothermal well field because that requires space. Air source does not require space, and we just want to test fit and make sure that it would fit. So as you can see, we've located it here so that we could maximize the site and replace the fields up here where actually is a better location for the fields for the overall site. And we'll continue to explore what we replace if Fort River is chosen. At Wildwood, it's a much smaller site. We've started conversations. There's the Hawthorne site over to the other side of the drive that we've started talking about and how we might be able to utilize that. This is the cemetery sliver up here in the upper corner that we've started to explore. Could that benefit us in any way? We have started talking about could we utilize some of the space that belongs to the middle school? And we understand that it's not fully under the control of the Amherst school committee, but that we would have to have that conversation. Again, the geothermal wells we've located here for now, recognizing these dots will not be visible to anyone. This will be a play field when it's completed. We just needed to show that it could be done. Same amount of parking, same amount of play fields, making sure we have complete access around the buildings. So everything from, the specific needs of each school are the same for each of the sites. And then for a new school at Wildwood, again, similar. We've identified 2 locations for the wells. Again, assume this will be green. When we're done, we will cover it. It will be play space. It could be outdoor learning. There's so many opportunities for it. We've also talked about what benefits would it be to be built into the hill. There may be added costs, but there may be added savings. So the focus that we'll do is look at the best location for a new school on both sites, but in particular to Wildwood, recognizing that it's a much more compact site. Outdoor learning will not be forgotten. It will be included, as will all of the play spaces. But as you can see, you know, the existing building takes up a large footprint, which limits us to where we can actually put a new school. There's actually a conversation, gee, maybe we could put it up closer to the road, and we'll explore the benefits of both and what that might mean. We're also cognizant of making sure at this point there's only one access into the site for traffic. So we want to make sure that we can get as many cars off the road to not impact traffic running along Strong Street or at the neighboring intersection, and try to have a drop-off loop as large as possible on site. And we'll go through all that. We've had our traffic report, the existing conditions completed, and now we're going to start exploring the impact of the additional students at both sites and the neighboring intersections. So I know everyone has seen this, but I'll just walk through this. These are the cost comparisons. They're really rough order of magnitude. I started to say at the beginning, we are conservative in our numbers. We try to identify standard basis of design, working with Pete Timothy, with A.M. Fogarty, who we've been working with, geez, for 25 years now, that he understands school design. He understands, he and his team, his company, A.M. Fogarty, they understand DNISCO, and they understand what we put into buildings. So although these are cost per square foot numbers, we talk about the nuances and making sure that all of the standard attributes are included. And he also has experience with, I think Margaret mentioned that he's on like every MSBA project, if not for being from the designer, he works for the OPM, because after PDP, you'll get 2 cost estimates to validate that the numbers are accurate. So with that, we have the Fort River option with 165 students. We will be required, and this is a point of reference for MSBA as well, to say, does it even make sense financially for them? And then we focus on the 575 student options, renovation addition at Fort River and renovation addition at Wildwood, as well as new construction at both sites. And you're going to see there's for the renovation and addition, you're going to see that the numbers are exactly the same right now for the building. This is the actual building addition, the building renovation. And then the new construction is slightly higher at Fort River. We wanted to make sure that we had some coverage for some potential additional structural requirements. We haven't gotten into it yet, but from our perspective, it's important to be conservative now so that we don't turn around at PDP, even schematic design, with a number that has not been presented earlier. I think I heard someone had said that a prior project, the number increased 63% or something like that from when it was submitted at PDP till schematic design. That we've never ever experienced anything like that. We like to be a little conservative at this point. You'll see that the demolition is pretty much the same across the board, right? So if it's a renovation and addition, there's less demolition as opposed to having to demolish the entire building. Hazardous materials are asbestos-containing materials, lead paint, things like that. They are pretty much consistent for Fort River. Wildwood, there's slightly higher BCT, I believe, that has asbestos containing material. It's totally fine the way it is, as long as it's not disturbed, but we just have to treat it differently when we remove it. And then obviously the site work has been a large conversation with everyone. And again, this is based on what we know about the sites, certain assumptions that we've made about the sites. Obviously, Fort River is a larger site, so there's going to be a little bit additional cost. There's 2 entrances, so the drives are longer. And then other components that we've reiterated in the past is that you have fields that we are suggesting to replicate. If the town chooses not to, then that's fine. We are going to have to replace them though, because we are going to have to rip them up when we're doing construction. But we wanted to make them, we understand they're a little wet. So we are suggesting to raise them and put proper drainage underneath, so they're actually a town commodity that can be utilized all the time. If the town feels that they're adequate the way they are, then we'll just replace them in kind, and we won't need to add the extra layer of drainage, etc. The other component was, by doing that, we also were suggesting, because there is a high water table, that we would raise them an extra foot to also help prevent the fields being wet. And by doing that, we were also raising the building a foot. So these were best guesses at this point in time. Now, once we submit the PDP to MSBA, we can really get into understanding all of the site attributes and trying to tune this and work with you all to ensure that what we're suggesting is what is the wishes of the community. Do you want to improve the fields? Do you want to leave them alone? That's a conversation that will need to occur. So what you'll see is these are the direct costs of the project coming across, if we just kind of forget about the 165. But it ranges from 45.1 to $50 million. And then we have what's called markups for the project. It's approximately, at this point, we utilize a 25% markup to the direct costs. That includes all of the associated fees for the OPM, for the designer, all your furniture and equipment, all of your technology. It includes the contingencies for the project. This also includes escalation. And right now we're factoring an 11% escalation for 2024 start of construction. So 11% escalation is included in that number. And as you've heard us talk, we haven't started design. So there is a design contingency in here for scope that we haven't even talked about. And that will decrease in time, but those costs will be brought up into the direct cost of the work. But so there's a lot of markups. And then the other thing is this is all assuming that we're going with CM at risk delivery method. So this is the construction method to build your school. So this would be a CM at risk who would be on board, hopefully during schematic design, that will work with us, especially it's incredibly important if it's going to be a renovation and addition project, and it's going to be a phased and occupied construction. So they have some fees up front, and there's some profit in there for the CM. And I know Margaret will be getting into the differences in construction methods with the building committee in probably very shortly. But anyway, so this is where it takes us to the total project cost. Did this just get in the way of everyone? I don't know how to get rid of it. So then, oh my God, there we go. So then what we did was we said, okay, here's the construction cost for the project. Then you assume 1.25% markup for for the total project cost. So now what we're looking at, and did I get ahead of myself? I think I did. The markups, I totally apologize. The markups associated with these direct costs are the contractor markups. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. These markups are the escalation, the contingencies, the fees for designer and OPM, your FF&E and your technology, and the escalations, as well as the designer contingency. This amount is your total construction cost. Then we have a total project cost that we factor at 1.25, a multiplier of 1.25 to the construction cost. And these include items such as your FF&E, furniture and equipment, your technology, our design fees. It includes testing. There's an enormous amount of testing, especially for site and structural testing that occurs, utilities, all kinds of associated costs associated with the project. And we'll be providing and going through all of that with the building committee. But a rule of thumb is a 25% markup onto the construction cost. Then we also wanted to include the photovoltaics. And the reason why we didn't include it in the construction cost is because we believe in working with our solar design company, they're called Solar Design Associates, is that providing, hiring, and working with a contractor that will help us design and construct the PVs. And when we say they're turnkey, what that means is they're a specialized company that will come in and design and install your PVs, both canopies and on the roof. And that's important to note, because if we brought that into the construction project, the contractor would then put even an added markup on it. So it's part of the project. We just didn't want to bring it into the construction cost because we didn't want the markups to occur on something that it would be a turnkey process. And then we've added the geothermal because it will be a net zero building. We just haven't determined how we're going to achieve net zero, that we've just listed that number out so that when we start working with the net zero folks, that we can identify the life cycle costs and everything else that it would occur with geothermal, so we can understand the value, both first cost, but the savings over time. And then we've added the percent for art of 250,000 across the board. So then what you can see is that the grand total for construction ranges from 74.9 million to 80.2 million. And then you mark that up at 25%. And your cost ranges from 93.6 million to over $100 million. We started looking at what can we control to reduce the cost without compromising the town's objectives for the project. So I had mentioned that the construction delivery method of CM at risk, there does come a cost associated with it, but there's an enormous benefit, especially when you're talking about a renovation and addition project. When it's a new construction, their services aren't as important or valuable up front or during the process of the construction. And the other alternative for a public project is called design bid build, or Chapter 149. And this has been the standard process for many, many years. So we are suggesting that it is absolutely possible, if new construction is the preferred solution, that we could utilize a design bid build option of construction delivery method, which we believe would reduce your costs. So we would be looking at at right now, because we haven't vetted everything, anywhere from 88.8 million to 92.9 million. We understand these numbers are high. We understand that there were project numbers and costs that had to be forecasted or brought up a few years ago. No one would have predicted where we are with the construction costs. What Margaret actually had done, Margaret's the OPM, identified at the building committee that this is consistent with every other project that's coming in right now. And in fact, we're below where some of the projects are coming in, and they're a year ahead of us. So we believe we're conservative with our numbers. We want to make sure that we try to incorporate as much as we know right now. No one's asking you to vote on anything right now. What we're asking, to the contrary, to the building committee on Friday, is to eliminate options that you no longer want to study, which we believe will be the 165 students. Over the next few months, this is when we're really going to get into the conversations about how do we achieve net zero, right? What's the best and highest use of the sites? If it ends up at Fort River, how would we replicate those fields? What's important to the town? All of these conversations need to occur over the next few months. And now this is when our work actually starts. So thank you very much for your final vote for the program and building size. The school building committee will vote to approve, hopefully, the PDP on Friday. We'll be submitting the PDP to MSBA on the 15th. We believe that the building committee on Friday will request that we continue to evaluate the alternatives of Wildwood versus Fort River, renovation and addition versus new construction, and the net zero solutions. We're not saying net zero isn't part of the project. We're just saying there are options for the net zero energy component of that. It's a very short 3-month window, and we will be requesting a preferred solution in June from the building committee, and then we'll be submitting our preferred schematic report at the end of June to the MSBA, and they will vote on it at the end of August. So with that, I'll open it up.
Thank you.
Would you like me to take this down, Allison?
Yeah, I think so. Unless there's specific questions about the slides, I'm just going to scan quickly. No. You can always bring them back up if somebody wants to look at. So questions from the committee? Peter?
Yeah, so thank you for this. Just a brief comment is, I'm very, very cognizant of separation of responsibilities in this process. And the school committee just finished a very important part of our process. And now the focus shifts to the decisions that the school building committee will be making. And so we have Mr. Harrington as our representative on that committee. And so it's great to get this information direct. Just because there's, members of the public watching tonight, I want to make it clear that the school committee will not be deciding the site or the ad reno.
Sorry, when I say you, I mean
I understand.
Town. I apologize.
No, you weren't. I didn't think you were confusing it all. But it's such an important point that I just want to put a fine point on it. That I want to be very respectful of the lines of demarcation here, and that we. I would be upset if somebody stepped over the line to school committee, and so I want to be very respectful of the school building committee. That's the body that's going to be making the decisions about ad reno and site and net zero implementation, and that if the public is interested in any of those topics, that they should send their input to that committee. So that being said, just the one question I'm wondering about is climate resiliency. So we hear talk a lot as we should, about carbon reduction, and what we can do for site analysis that will impact the build. But then the building's going to be there for 50 years, right? And so, and I don't need you to make like a whole analysis of climate change, but obviously that's like on our minds, right? And so it's one thing to pay the price to build the building, and then it's which site is going to, will the building last longer on, I guess, for lack of a better term. So is that something that is part of your process, as part of the school building committee's purview, or is that something that if we want, the town adds on at a later point?
So the resiliency piece is an important component as you're looking at the sustainability of your project. I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, Peter, if the building would last longer on one site versus another. I'm not sure if I heard that correctly. If I did, we would not expect the building to last longer on one site over another site. There has been conversation about carbon, and as a renovation addition, is that a better for your life cycle carbon analysis, because otherwise you're demolishing 80,000 square feet of carbon and now you're building more. But that conversation, we said we would certainly take a look at that, just to help analyze and understand the impact of your decision, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a hard question to answer, and I probably didn't do a good job articulating what but anyway, it's not our scope for sure. It's just something that has been top of mind for me. But I appreciate it.
Any other questions? Okay. So as mentioned, the school building committee will be taking this up and voting on the PDP on Friday this week. Yeah, as a key next step. Okay.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, then we can move on from this item. Great. Jennifer?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, but before we do, I'm going to move that we extend our meeting by 30 minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, second by Jennifer. We'll take a roll call vote. Irv?
Aye.
Allison, aye. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Ben?
Ben, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
Okay. So we're extended. We'll take a 5-minute break. It's 9:23 on my computer. So at 9:28, we'll restart.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
I'll be signing off. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you all. Sorry, I was muted. So we have a quorum, so we'll get started moving on to our next item, which is our budget hearing. And apologies to members of the public that might be here for that we're an hour late on that. So we'll start with the slides that are here, that are included in our packet on the budget for fiscal year 23. And then we'll open the floor to comments from the public, and we'll give at least an equal time to public comments as to the length of time for the slides.
So Doug, are you able to bring up the slides now? Again, this is going to be a pretty brief slide deck, or presentation. And so we did the initial last month. And again, Doug will just briefly go over where we are in our thinking, and we're hoping it's a rather dull budget year. Like at least that's the aim. So I'll, not because of Doug, but because of the finances, I should be clear. But I'll turn it over to Doug to walk us through.
I'm happy to be dull. That's okay. So I will just take you through this slide deck. Is almost virtually identical to the last one you saw, so I'll be extraordinarily brief on some of the items here. Just a quick reminder for everyone relative to the budget process. We start as early as October and start putting some things together. Continue through December and January. We've had a variety of meetings over the last few months in trying to work through what our level services look like, what changes or additions might be necessary, what things need to change relative to changing needs of students in our buildings, that sort of thing. And so on this slide, we're at bullet point number 4 of 5, which is the budget hearing. And then when you meet again, I think you indicated the 29th, you will actually vote the budget. And then we kick into the town of Amherst process, which is sort of articulated here on this next slide, which is that you guys have to vote a budget and present it to the town manager by April 1st. He then has to take that budget and bring it to the town council by May 1st. The finance committee and the town council then have 30 days to review the budget. Essentially, they'll take the month of May to do that, and then the council will actually vote a budget sometime in June. So that's the general process, which you are probably familiar with, but went over again. As far as our budget for the coming year, these are the key factors. We know what our increase from the town is, what they're available to afford us. It's 2.73%. Most of the town went with 2.5%, but the 0.73 has to do with how we account for our charter and our charter tuition reimbursement, as well as the school choice tuition charges for students that leave our district under school choice. We're going to use, as far as our students that come to us for school choice, we're going to use about $750,000 in revenue to help support our budget. Circuit breaker is for extraordinary costs, that for extraordinary special education costs, we get reimbursed for that to some extent. That's under a program called Circuit Breaker. We utilize those to support our budget in subsequent years. So this $346,000 that we're using is actually was for work that was done in fiscal 21 and paid to us this year, and then we'll use it next year. And then, of course, we have continuing support from federal sources related to the pandemic, and those are going to continue to do the things that are sort of external to our budget in some respects this year. I don't want to say really external, but they're augmentative things that we're doing relative to our budget. But we're going to need some support for our budget in order to maintain level services for next year. On the expense side of things, you can see we're still in negotiation with our unions relative to contracts. And so 5 or 6 contracts are still in negotiation. I will say one of those is nearing completion. The other 4 will be continuing through the springtime. We've made estimates for what we think those costs are likely to be, and how well we can get that to fit within our budget. And so that's included in our projections for the coming year. Our health insurance is just shy of 4%. And that last bullet is really just a sort of artifact of things you might notice in changes between last fiscal year and this fiscal year relative to maintaining level service. Really a shift in how we represent things on the budget, not so much anything else. change from the last time you've seen this slide is that last time I had indicated approximately $394,000. This is the more precise number, and we're likely to use ESSER funds to support our budget to do that. Again, the idea being that over this year and this coming year and the following year, we'll then be transitioning to the 6th grade, coming to the middle school. There'll be some economies relative to that, and so these ESSER funds will be helpful in helping us get from here to there. And realizing some economies relative to that change in structure. And so that's the sort of critical message this evening, is that we have a resource available to us that will help us support our budget and maintaining our level services for the coming year. So this is really the heart of the slide, and really the only thing that's changed on this slide is to represent this support from that grant support here in the sort of lower right corner. And anytime on an expense chart that you see something in parentheses that seems like a negative number, which it is, because a negative expense is a income or revenue source, and so that reduces our expense by that amount. And so that brings our budget total to the $25,052,500, which will meet the resources that the town of Amherst is available to provide to us, as indicated by their directive earlier in the year, and as they went through and projected their expense and revenue picture for their larger full townwide budget. And so I think I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions that anyone has, and if not, and then of course we can hear from the public relative to the hearing.
Sure.
Doug, can you tell us where you're likely, or where it is likely that the ESSER funds will be applied to this budget for this fiscal year?
I think there's a couple of things. Well, one that has probably caught everyone's attention in the last couple of weeks is the price of gasoline has gone up rather considerably. So it could very well be in our transportation and our utilities costs are an area that if we sort of have our budget expenses a little higher than what we projected, that might be an area. Mostly, it's going to be, as with most things in our budget, the lion's share of our budget is around personnel and their costs. And so that is likely where we'll spend most of those resources, is going to be on continuing to support the level of staffing and service providing for students that we do. So it's largely going to be on that front. And so it's going to be critical for us as we transition over the next couple of years, because these ESSER funds are only here right now. They're not an ongoing revenue source for us. And so it's going to be critical for us as we transition through the next couple of years to either reduce our costs or find other revenue sources to support that as we go ahead.
And what, Doug, just what I'm trying to understand is, all right, if we're going to use those ESSER funds to support the FY23 budget, then I would like to know where they're going to be applied, because then that gives me an insight into what we're going to be looking at the next fiscal year.
So I would, excuse me. I mean, I think it's going to be, from a personal standpoint, it's up here. It's going to be in really all of those areas. I think to a large degree, it's going to be regular instruction, special education instruction. Those are the two biggest areas of personnel that we have, and that's likely to be the case of where we're going to leverage those resources. I think the unknown in the moment, though, is still, we have some unresolved contracts at the moment. We're still working through that process of negotiation. That could have an impact on where we'll leverage those resources and need to apply them, which again is in personnel lines, but across all the personnel lines. I think as far as our expenses, our expenses in this section of the budget, potentially transportation, potentially a little bit in utilities, but mostly I think we're gonna see it here in our our staff, and particularly in our education staff, because that's in our regular and special education staff. Those are the largest areas and the most likely areas where we'll spend those resources from ESSER funds to continue to support them.
Can I it just seems I think it's a little confusing to see grant revenue, so ESSER funds, in the expense budget as a negative expense, as opposed to a revenue source that we're pulling into our general fund. Because it's not really an expense or a savings, and I think, I don't know if this is your question, Irv, but the expenses for any of these line items that you're showing us here aren't changing, and they're not going to be reduced. It's just that we're using different revenue source to pay for them than the town of Amherst appropriations. Is that?
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement. I think the other way to think about it is that when on that previous slide, when I talked about we're going to use $750,000 of school choice revenue to support our budget, we essentially come into lines within this section appear, and most often in this regular education, although not absolutely required to, but and we reduce those expense lines by that amount. Likewise with circuit breaker, that typically gets applied actually more often down this area here, the special education line under the expenses. So that number would be larger by approximately $346,000 if we were not applying those revenue streams to that. I think in this case, because we're still working through some our unknowns as far as our negotiations are down in our control accounts, which are down here in this contingency section, which is why it's increased so much. It holds a block of revenue or expense that we're expecting to then distribute across these other areas, particularly up in this area where the payroll is. Most of those contingencies fall into that category. And so I didn't want to presume, I didn't want this to get sort of lost in here in that I think that, it's a very specific source of revenue. It's an unusual source of revenue. So I thought having it sort of demonstrated here is clearer that we're leveraging that. Whereas the other ones that we have, like our circuit breaker, like our school choice, are more typically, although difficult to spot, they are still reducing those expense lines, sort of every year and more consistently in sort of the areas that I've pointed out there. And so that's part of why I've kept that as a separate line. And I think that because there's some, a fair amount of unknown relative to our negotiations, I think that's another reason. I mean, I could apply that up here, but it still has, if I were to take the entirety of this and just subtract it from the $6 million line under regular education, that wouldn't be a truly accurate picture of what we might do. But it also doesn't factor into the account that we've got our control accounts here, our contingency accounts that where we're factoring in our negotiations. And so those aren't wholly independent of each other in some respects. And I don't want to necessarily presume to locate where we're spending that in advance of us sort of getting some of these other things settled.
Jennifer.
So I have two questions. My first is about sibling enrollment in district-wide special ed programs. So from watching school committee meetings last year, I know that this topic came up, and the decision was made the topic came up, and you discussed not discussing and voting on it last year because it could have budget implications if an extra van or school run was needed. And my recollection was that the school committee was supposed to discuss it in fall of 21, which I don't think happened. And of course, there's a lot going on. But I wanted to ask if we could discuss it, if we could get it on the agenda for the next meeting. And I'm glad that we're going to have another meeting before we have to vote, before we have to send this to the town manager on April 1st. Could we discuss it at the next meeting? Because I think it's an important topic, and it actually came up in the CPAC letter regarding the school building project today about, and they actually asked for an update on what the status is of sibling enrollment. So I just want to ask if that discussion can happen, and that it might have budget implications. So I'm not sure how that would fit into the process. So that's my request. My next request is, I asked at the last budget meeting if the cuts to specials teachers that's happening this fiscal year is included in this budget that we're looking at for fiscal 23, and I was told that yes, they are. So I want to ask Doug, if can we look at a version of the budget that restores those specials positions to what they were before the cuts were made? Like, what would it look like if we did want to restore those cuts? Can we look at a version of the budget that does that?
I can jump in if that's okay, Doug.
Please.
I think we could certainly bring that to the next meeting. Essentially, it'll increase the use of ESSER funds, which again aren't forever, by the amount of that budget cut. But I mean, it's a simple calculation, relatively simple calculation, and we can certainly bring that to the meeting on the 29th.
Peter?
Yeah, so so a couple follow-ups on the points that Jennifer just raised. So on the siblings policy, yes, your memory is correct. So what happened is Ms. Lord and I were supposed to follow up with the superintendent. So that discussion did happen, and then we were supposed to bring that back to the full committee, and that did not happen. So we can certainly discuss the results of that conversation. But basically, we were tasked with talking to the superintendent about what the policy and particular budget implications of doing that might be before and after a potential new building project. So that's something we discussed at that agenda item. So the special teachers restoration. So I'm glad Jennifer raised it. I mean, I would also appreciate talking about that next time, whether it's part of the budget or whether it's a separate item. I just think we've heard enough comment about it in the last year since the last year's budget passed that it warrants it. We did talk about it extensively in the lead up to that budget year, and we had multiple conversations about the explanation for it. But it's been a year since that budget passed, so I think that's and we've also had some feedback from staff about impact. So I think it's perfect. I think it would be a good idea to have an update about what has the impact been, what would the budget impact be for restoration, and then we can make a informed decision.
I'm happy to bring that back to the next meeting.
Are there any other last questions before we open it up to the community for the hearing? Seeing none, we will now move on to the hearing portion of this topic. And for any members of the community that are joining us in the Google Meet, please raise your hand. You'll be given 3 minutes to speak. And generally, we are here to listen and take input. If there's questions of clarification that Mike or Doug can answer, then they'll answer them. But this is not a discussion. Just as a reminder, this is a hearing for us to hear input and comment feedback from the community. So with that, Amber.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for the time. My name is Amber Connell-Martin, and I'm a parent of 2 elementary school students. I have a 5th grader at Wildwood, and I have a kindergartner at Fort River. I was glad to hear you all talk about the issue with the specials budget, and because I was actually joining this meeting to advocate for the full-time positions to be restored for arts and tech teachers at all of the elementary schools. I think that we live in a community that very much values the arts, and I think all budgets are, of course, a reflection of what we value, and so I think that having at least one full-time position for each of those things is extremely important. And I understand that we have to think about our budget and be smart about what we're funding, and we have to use the taxpayers' money in a way that's the most efficient possible. But at the same time, I don't think this is a place that we should be cutting. And if you want to look at staff impact of these cuts, I mean, look no farther than Wildwood, where the art teacher, who was really beloved by the students and my child as well, left in December. I don't think she publicly said why she was leaving, but I can't imagine that her situation with being 0.8 time at the school didn't have something to do with that. So there is an impact. I don't think this is the place to cut, and I'm so glad that you guys are going to be looking at this again. I think it's something the community really supports, and those are our values. So I would really like to see you restore those positions to full-time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments from the community? And just a note, we did not receive any written comments or audio voice recordings for the hearing. Last call. For folks that are that didn't stick with us through through all of this time to this late hour, we do always accept comment at our email, schoolcommittee@arps.org, or to our individual email addresses. Public comment at our next meeting when we will be voting is also welcome. So there's lots of opportunity to provide input and feedback, such as what we just heard before we get to the budget. And so that meeting is in 3 weeks. So if there's no other folks, I'm just going to scan the people dropping out of the meeting. Okay. Great. Oh, Peter.
Not that I want to extend our meetings any longer than they need to be, but in order for us to fulfill our hearing obligation, you'd mentioned at the top that the public comment period needed to be at least as long as the slide period, and we happen to engage in kind of a discussion of one of those slides, and so I'm not sure if I know nobody right now is wanting to make public comment, so it might be a little awkward to sit here in silence, but I just want to make sure that we don't miss fulfilling our hearing obligation prior to budget passage.
Thank you. Yeah, it probably would be 5 more minutes. I don't know if any of the furry friends that have made appearances want to make any comments. I'm seeing 2. Tails raised. We'll give it 1 more minute. And I'll just make one last call. So as I mentioned before, we welcome and invite comment, feedback, input, questions at all times at our school committee at arps.org. You can submit public comment for our meeting on the 29th, which is when we'll be discussing and voting on the budget. And that's scpubliccomment@arps.org or to any of our individual email addresses. So there's lots of opportunities still to weigh in on the budget. With that, we'll move to the FY22 second quarter budget report, which is our next item on our agenda. And as we move to that, I'm going to move that we extend our meeting by 30 minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, second by Jennifer. A quick roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Sorry, I said Ben, but I couldn't hear anything because I heard the...
Oh, Ben, I
heard the ping of the presentation going up. Jennifer?
Jennifer, I.
Allison, I. Irv?
Irv, I.
Thank you.
We will commit to make these last few topics go as quickly as possible, given the time. So we'll be as brief as we can be while still being informative.
So with that, I'll just say if you were at the regional school committee meeting last week when we went over the second quarter, this is almost the exact same story to tell here. The short story regarding quarter two and where we are with our budget for quarter two is we're in good shape. Our budgets are largely on track. Our spending for payroll, for our primary salaries and payroll, is a little lower than expected, which is partly a result of needing to hire people throughout the fall and not having everybody first day of school. Just the nature of hiring this year is such that it took us a while to get fully staffed up, and so that's caused some savings in those accounts. Our contracted services is pretty much on track. That's mostly summer school, but some other things as well. That's in good order. Our substitutes are running it on track. It's likely when we see our substitute lines for third quarter, it's likely that's going to uptick a little bit. We'll keep a close eye on that. There was a significant boost with the Omicron variant, and so we probably had some more substantial use of substitutes during that time period. But again, nothing that has me necessarily really worried about our funding level for that area of the budget. In the other areas of the budget, we're either on track or below budget. For those areas that are a little bit above budget, it's oftentimes either a result of things that are paid for in the early part of the fiscal year. We still sort of see that in a more pronounced way in the second quarter review, like we did in the first quarter review, or in anticipation of expenses, meaning we know we have upcoming expenses. We've encumbered the money. We've sort of set it aside in preparation for spending. It makes our payment a little more timely. And so those that are above 50% mark for this time of for the second quarter review are not unexpected in that regard. And so you'll see in some areas like where is it? Risk and benefits, we're close to 50%. That's actually very good to be at that point, because we pay our some of our retirement expenses up early in the year. That's probably more an artifact of hiring progressing through the fall a little bit, and so it took us a little while to get all the staff on board, and so the expenses related to their health insurance and that sort of thing were a little under budget. The only thing that I have highlighted in this at the moment is our special education expense, and that's they're not over budget as yet. I don't expect them to. I think we have enough resources to bring to bear in that area in particular that will keep us on track throughout the rest of the year. But it's a little closer to the top end, and it's a bigger number. So I want to kind of keep a close eye on that as we go through the remainder of the year. But I don't have an expectation or know of anything or have anticipation of any extraordinary expense that's going to come up that's going to really cause us concern in that area. But again, I think the short story is things are in good shape as of Q2. We'll look at it in Q3 really closely and try to get back to you in April with any fine tuning of budget or adjustments relative to areas that have resources and areas that need resources, and get back to you for those adjustments as soon as we can in the early part of the fourth quarter after the third quarter finishes. But the short story is things are in really pretty good shape.
Thank you. Questions? Jennifer.
So Doug, are there percentage parameters that define green, yellow, and red, or is it more subjective? Because all things being equal, I would, if we're 50% through the year, I would expect anything from like 75 to 80 to 90 to be yellow or red. But there's a lot of green, which isn't a bad thing. And I hear what you're saying about how some expenses are they're naturally front loaded. But like, for example, district-wide regular ed other under expense accounts is 93.9 and it's green. And the one right below it is 93.3, but it's yellow. So like, wouldn't it be a yellow or a red if we're halfway through the year and we've spent 90% of our budget?
It could be, but I didn't. Let me just say this. Generally, it's subjective.
Okay.
In that particular case, I think that the thing to look at there is that the larger amount, the total budget is only $43,000. So first of all, its impact on the larger budget is not large. So I don't want to make something red that materially doesn't have a huge impact on the other areas of the budget. So that's one piece of it. And then I think the other piece is largely that spending is in the encumbered column, which means it's in anticipation of spending. It isn't actually spent yet. So that's also a factor there. I will say in that particular area, most of that is about support for after-school programs. And so they've anticipated the need for tuition support and materials that they need for those programs. And so they've set aside the funds to carry that through the remainder of the year. And so it's a judgment call. I agree. There are some areas, but again, you can look at the IS budget and you see it at 83%. Well, most of the software gets renewed in July, and so they spend a tremendous amount of their expense budget in the very early part of the year, and they buy as much equipment as they can in the summertime so that it's prepared and ready and in hand for the use of students at the start of school. And so those are areas where we sort of use our experience to try to judge whether we're worried or not worried at that point. Some are harder to judge that way, but I generally use sort of evaluative process, but more qualitative than quantitative.
And can I ask a follow-up question? So what about the district-wide sped at 93%? Wouldn't that be red? I mean, you don't sound concerned, but like we've used almost all of the budget and then we're only halfway through the year. So
that's correct. But again, I think there's a fair amount of encumbrance there still remaining. I think that there are. I think the reason why that's not red for me is that there's not an expectation of any of the costs that we currently have through the remainder of the year going to exceed sort of budget and not in a significant way. The other thing is we have resources we apply to that. So we have, we've applied circuit breaker funds to that. We also apply some IDE grant funds, and sometimes we make judgments as we go through as to how much to apply this way versus other ways. And so in that regard, that lessens my concern if we were to have a greater amount of expense there than we're anticipating. So if something were to come into play, we've got some resources available through the IDEA grant that can help us support that. Likewise, if we don't need it in that way, then there are two things. IDEA can carry, it's a 2-year period of time in which we can utilize that. And then also, then we can apply that resource just to some other things. So as we get into quarter 4, those are the kind of judgments, and working with the student services staff, Dr. Brady, Joanne Smith, et cetera, and we have conversations about, what are the resources do we need to apply it to budgets and budget lines specifically in the current fiscal year, or can we extend it for use in the next year, or are there other particular things that we want or can do with those resources?
Other questions? Seeing none. Okay. Thank you. I think we're on that one. Now we'll move on now to the health and safety update. I'll turn that over to you, Mike.
Yeah, so can I make a recommendation given the hour? I think it's really important we do the health and safety update. I think it's really important that there's a school choice vote, and if there's a controversy over that, we can push it. I don't want to do shortchange the 6th grade issue, and I wonder if we can. I know we keep on punting it, but I think the next meeting agenda that I have doesn't have as many items, and I don't think much is going to happen in the next 3 weeks with it. I think I wouldn't be comfortable going into April without having talked about it, but I'm just thinking about the time, the energy level that I both personally experience as well as perceive on this call. I think we can do the next two, do those 2 items, and then push the that 6th grade one in more full detail, because I wouldn't want you all. That's a big thing, and I don't want it to be lost in the fatigue. That sound is. I know I'm suggesting something to the chair and to others. Does that sound okay to folks?
I was going to make that suggestion as well, but I was going to wait till after health and safety. But go ahead.
Well, just help frame it, and maybe people might be able to have more questions in health and safety that they might want to ask, even if they know they don't have that many other items. So that's why I chose to do it. So health and safety. So thanks to the Amherst Health Department, they continue to do rounds of vaccinations at our elementary schools. You read a lot of articles that there are no first shots or very few first shots being given. We keep on coming back for second shots, and then more families are interested in giving first shots at all 3 of our schools. So we're very fortunate to work with, Jennifer Brown, our health director, who does on-site during the school day. And just if she gets kids and families with kids who are willing to do it, she just keeps on cycling through every 3 weeks. So, I want to share my public appreciation of the Amherst Health Department and their continued work, as well as Robin Supernaut, who coordinates with the elementary school nurses, who are all fabulous. We're seeing a huge decline in cases. So we've had, in this district, had 1 case since last Wednesday. That was today. So that's really different than we were a month ago or 2 months ago. So I think it is noteworthy to say that. I think it's also noteworthy about the health and safety measures that we've taken, and our vaccination rate, which continues to be over 70% at the elementary level, which is much, much higher than the state average and certainly much higher than the national average. So, and our elementary staff vaccination rate of over 94%. And all of those things are significant. I also appreciate the health department, because every time they've come in to do elementary student shots, they've brought a pack of booster shots, so that staff members could go, and staff members continue to receive them. So much appreciation to our staff, our students, our families, but the Amherst Health Department as well. I think it's also worth noting that we are still every other week sending out hundreds of rapid test kits to students, and then also to staff as well. There's been a high uptake. Well over 2/3 of our elementary families are accessing those, and more continue to get added to our roster. We continue to offer boxes of rapid tests to anyone who is interested, who has a family member, or they themselves, the student that is, test positive, so that they can have the supports they need. If it's additional tests that are needed beyond what's went home, or they're not part of our program, we're still able to provide those rapid tests, which are they're obviously important anytime, but particularly if there's a positive case in the home. And that has been a well-used part of our program. So we appreciate the fact that we're able to offer those. The bigger title or bigger topic, obviously, is the mask mandate. With the news of UMass breaking not so long ago. Maybe other people knew a long time ago, but I only knew right at the beginning of this meeting that UMass, as of 2 hours from now, I think their mask mandate, I believe that's right, their mask mandate will end on the university campus. Certainly, it's a topic of conversation. On Friday last week, in the newsletter, we put out that if the Amherst Board of Health on Thursday at their next meeting does vote to end the townwide mask mandate, that would also apply to the schools as well. I did talk to the Amherst Health Director, and as opposed to, this is no critique of UMass, we're not a college or a university, we wanted a little bit more time to be able to process this with students. So the idea would be that the mask mandate would end on Monday. I don't know how the Board of Health is going to vote, right? That's not my forecasting skills are weak in that domain, but we are planning for the potential that they will vote to end the mask mandate. So we do have videos that we're developing for every student at the elementary level, like a different video for the K-3 set, and probably the 1 to 4 to plus, including the secondary schools as well, so that there's common messaging. We think it's really important that all students and all staff receive a message. Trying to narrow it down to 3 minutes. I'm working really hard at it, and we will have it in Spanish as well. We'll have information sheets that go to families. The short story is that if that does happen, the only place that masks will be required in our schools is in the nurse's office, because they are considered a healthcare facility. And at this time, all healthcare facilities require face coverings. I think the other piece is for students or staff members returning from a positive COVID test and isolation period will also be required to wear masks for days 6 through 10. That's consistent with state guidance and recommendations. Many districts in the state have went this route, right? We're certainly not trendsetter. East Hampton is going live tomorrow with that. Hadley was on Monday. Frontier, I believe, and that supervisory union will be next Monday, as well as Belchertown. So we're not alone in this. Some districts, especially in the eastern part of the state, as well as Hampden County, have started all the way back on the 28th. So I think the big thing that our communication says is threefold. One, if this happens, all of our other safety measures will continue. Rapid tests, pool testing, distancing, ventilation, all of those things are still going to be in place. I know some places, because the guidance has shifted, have gone to not having distancing and not having students in desks separated. That's not where we are. It's really solely the mask piece or face covering that would change. The second is that we want to make sure that students and families and staff members feel like there is no social pressure or reduced social pressure to make any choice. So message explicit about bullying and teasing at the elementary level. There are no spaces where masks, other than the nurse office, where masks are required. There's also no spaces where masks can't be worn. And we're emphasizing that. I think something I'm planning to put in the video is that I'm not planning on changing my masking behavior at this time. People I work with likely are, if there is not a mask rule, and we want everyone to feel and be respected with the choice that they're going to make. And particularly for families of children or staff members who either have just heightened concern or there may be medical reason for that, we want to make sure that everyone is supported in that decision, and that I believe that many folks in our district will continue to mask even if a mandate ends. We haven't had an outdoor mask mandate all year. I go out to elementary recess, at least half the kids are continuing to wear a mask outside, right? No one's telling them to. It's a choice they're making. And I do believe that it will not be 100% one way or 0% the other way. I don't think that's the way this is going to play out. But we want to prepare students for that. And I think the last is, again, to reassure students and the community that things may change, right? Knock on wood, we may be in a place a couple months from now where we're relaxing other policies. That would be wonderful, because that'll be a sign of where we are with the pandemic. It also could be the case that things swing the other way, and that we're talking about reinstituting more measures like a mask mandate. That we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen then. But at this time, this is the public health guidance we're receiving from the state. And then if the town votes it, from our local authorities, and that's where moving forward. But there is no such thing as permanence or closure. My non-American friends tell me that all the time. It's a very American concept, closure. And so, we're trying to make sure that folks know that we can't guarantee that it'll last forever. This is the current plan moving forward. So that's a long-winded way of preparing for a vote that I don't know how it'll go, but we want to be as prepared as possible with communication to staff, students, and the community. And again, we wanted to land in this place like we did, oddly enough, 2 years ago, where we wanted to have a common messaging that goes out to everybody. So at least there's a core set of understandings moving forward. And there's going to be lots of feelings and emotions, but hopefully not confusion. That's the part we can probably do our best to control. So that's the health and safety update for this evening. Happy to answer or take any questions or comments.
Any questions? Peter?
I just want to briefly say I really appreciate the way that you've handled this, especially as we've come from Omicron to here. I particularly like the way that you've handled the communication and the respect. I think those two things go together, and we stand in real contrast to a lot of other districts in terms of how much chaos this has caused or not. You've been very forthcoming with the community about your continued conversations with the health director and about this is something that we're going to have to continue to react to. And so I think that proactive setting of expectations, along with making real efforts to communicate respect and support for all decisions, individual decisions has been really important, and I really appreciate that as part of how you've managed this.
Any questions? Thank you for that update. And so we will push item F, 6th grade move, to our next meeting, and we'll move now to the school choice vote. Mike.
So what's before you tonight, we had the hearing already, so is a decision for the Amherst School Committee to consider whether the Amherst Elementary School District will continue to accept school choice students. My recommendation is to continue being a school choice district, and really we're looking at kindergarten here. We're not looking to add significant numbers of students, even within kindergarten with the building project and other variables. We're seeing if there are empty seats in existing classrooms, not adding school choice students to add another section. We know that these students could directly be impacted by a building project. In other words, they would still be in our schools if this building project goes to completion as scheduled. So we are really conscious of the number of students per grade level that we'd be slated to have at a 900, I believe 900, it's late, I apologize, but at roughly a 950 student K-5 district. So if you do the math and divide by 6, we want to stay well under that number for the number of students that we would accept. But we also don't know what the enrollment will be until the students arrive, and that changes until late August. So we have to make a judgment call in sort of late June, early July about what our numbers look like and how many choice students to take. However, choice students have been wonderful for our district. They are a benefit to us, not just financially, but the diversity of experience they bring, as well as many other facets. They've also been a real benefit to the Caminantes program, because we have received some school choice students who have participated who have Spanish language background, and they add to the diversity and the richness on a language front, and help our instructional model continue, because we try to be as close to 50-50 as we can. So it's my recommendation we continue being a school choice district, and that we primarily look to add a modest amount of students to kindergarten as space allows.
And just for folks that are new to this, we don't usually vote on a number specific. It's just will we accept school choice students or not? So with that, I'll make a motion that we continue to be its choice, to accept school choice students for kindergarten, or for Amherst Elementary Schools. Sorry, I'm going to restate that without all the hiccups. I move that we approve the continuation of Amherst Elementary Schools as school choice, to accept school choice students.
Second.
Moved clunkily by Allison and seconded by Jennifer. We'll take a roll call vote. Ben?
Ben, aye.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Allison, aye. Irv?
Aye.
And the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. And future agenda planning. So as mentioned, our next meeting, we moved to the 29th because we have to have vote on the budget before April 1st, so that we can turn that into this town. So on March 29th, we'll meet. And then just for those tracking further into the future, then our next meeting right now is planned for May 3rd. So typically we meet once a month. So on that, I have that we'll be voting. We'll be looking at another alternate for the budget that adds back the specialist cuts that we had this year, and potentially voting on the budget. We'll have school building committee updates, ESSER spending update, the charter cost presentation or discussion, 6th grade to the middle school. We'll come back on appointments, and then health and safety updates. Jennifer.
So the next meeting is going to take the place of the April meeting. So we wouldn't meet in April.
Correct.
And is there a reason we're making it March 29th when we also have a regional meeting instead of the 22nd when we have no meeting?
The regional meeting is getting moved, is my understanding.
Good to
But
know.
it's a great question. We don't have one on the 22nd. So, Mike?
So I mean, if we did on the 22nd, it would just be adding a meeting instead of flipping it. And I can't make a meeting on the 22nd, personally. So that's another factor. But one thing I was going to say is we may look to, and sorry, I'm doing this live. I have not talked to either of the chairs, but look to flip the meetings in early May and late April, because I think we'll have a timeline decision about a math curriculum where we may need to meet before that last week in April for Amherst. So whether we add a meeting over the April break or flip them, we may end up having an April meeting. And that meeting, I think, would be the better one to do ESSER, because at that point our state reporting's due on that. So I think we'll get better data if we move the ESSER topic to the April/May meeting versus the late March one.
Okay. Any other questions? And we will work hard to stay on time next time. Okay. If you think of anything that for future meetings, I created a Amherst School Committee specific agenda planning document. So for future, I can attach it just so that folks, if it's helpful to have sort of that long range view for the remainder of the school year, we'll have that for the next one. Warrant report, I have two, so only two, I hope. Where did it go? And I will pull it up over here because I can't find it on my screen. I, Allison McDonald, authorized payroll in the amount of $734,693.84, dated February 23rd, 2022, and I signed that on February 28th, 2022. And I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature to payables in the amount of $67,447.04 for the warrant dated March 4th, 2022. This includes general fund expenses of $34,269.28, revolving fund expenses of $25,954.33, grant fund expenses of $2,250, an ESSER fund of $4,973.43, and I signed that on March 2nd, 2022. We don't have any gifts to accept this evening, so I will move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Allison, second by Jennifer. There's no discussion, and we'll take a roll call vote. Jennifer?
Aye.
Irv?
Aye.
Allison, aye. Peter?
Aye, aye.
Ben?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.